Adriana Moretti heard 3 words that shattered her world before she ever said, "I do." Standing in a marble hallway in her wedding dress, moments from marrying Chicago's most feared crime boss, she pressed herself against the wall as Luca de Rossi's voice drifted through the half-open door. "I don't want her. I never did." The marriage was nothing but a business transaction, a merger of power wrapped in white lace and lies. But Adriana Moretti didn't run. She walked down that aisle with her head high, vowing one thing. She would survive this, even if she couldn't make him love her. Stay with me until the end of this story, hit that like button, and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this tale travels. The August heat in Chicago was merciless, the kind that made marble feel like ice and silk like sandpaper. Adriana Moretti stood in the corridor of St. Cecilia's Cathedral, her fingers trembling as they clutched the cascading bouquet of white roses. The dress her mother had chosen, all Italian lace and seed pearls, felt like a beautiful cage. She could hear the murmur of 300 guests beyond the heavy oak doors. The cream of Chicago's underworld elite gathered to witness the union of 2 powerful families. She'd been preparing for this moment her entire life. The Moretti name carried weight in certain circles, the kind of weight that came with blood and secrets. Her father, Salvatore Moretti, had built an empire on the bones of his enemies, and now he was cementing his legacy the old-fashioned way, through his daughter's marriage. Adriana had met Luca de Rossi exactly 4 times before today. 4 carefully orchestrated dinners where they'd made polite conversation while their fathers discussed territories and percentages. He was 32, devastatingly handsome in that dangerous way that made women stupid and men careful. Dark hair, darker eyes, a jaw that could have been carved from the same marble that lined these halls. He spoke little, watched everything, and gave away nothing. She didn't love him. How could she? But she'd convinced herself that respect could grow into something more, that duty could become devotion, that a man who looked at her the way Luca did, with a kind of distant appreciation, like admiring a painting he hadn't chosen but could acknowledge was beautiful, might eventually see her as more than an acquisition. The cathedral doors were still closed. Her father had gone to check on some last-minute detail, leaving her alone with her thoughts and the oppressive weight of her future. She pressed one hand against the cool marble wall, trying to steady her breathing, trying to remember all the lessons her mother had drilled into her about posture and composure and never letting them see you sweat. That's when she heard voices, male voices, low and urgent, coming from the room adjacent to the corridor. The door was ajar, just a sliver of space, but sound traveled easily in these old stone halls. "Everything's in place?" That was Luca's voice. She'd recognize it anywhere, smooth as expensive whiskey, with an edge that suggested violence was always an option. "Yes, boss? The Morettis signed everything this morning. The docks, the shipping routes, the laundering operations in Milwaukee. It's all yours the moment you say, 'I do.'" The second voice belonged to Marco Vitale, Luca's right-hand man. Adriana had met him once, noted the cold intelligence in his eyes, the way he moved like a weapon waiting to be deployed. "Good." A pause, the sound of ice clinking in a glass. "Pour me another? I need it." "Wedding nerves?" Marco's tone held a hint of amusement. Then came the words that stopped Adriana's heart. "Don't be ridiculous. I don't want her. I never did." The marble hallway tilted. Adriana pressed both hands against the wall now, her bouquet dropping to the floor with a whisper of crushed petals. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The world had narrowed to those 7 words, playing on an endless loop in her mind. "I don't want her. I never did." "Then why go through with it?" Marco asked, and Adriana found herself leaning closer to the gap in the door, desperate for the answer, even as part of her screamed to walk away, to run, to do anything but listen to more. "Because it's business." Luca's voice was flat, matter of fact. "The Moretti girl is pretty enough, well-trained, from good stock. She'll give me legitimate heirs and keep her mouth shut about family business. That's all I need from a wife." "Some men might want more." "Some men are fools." The sound of glass meeting wood, a tumbler set down with finality. "Love makes you weak. It gives your enemies leverage. I watched my father destroy himself over my mother, saw how loving her made him vulnerable, how her death nearly brought down everything he'd built. I won't make that mistake." "So the Moretti girl is just a strategic acquisition, nothing more. I'll treat her well enough. Give her a comfortable life, a nice house, jewels, whatever women want. But she needs to understand from the beginning that this is a transaction. I'm buying the Moretti territories and alliances. She's part of the package like a signing bonus. Marco chuckled, low and ugly. Does she know? She's not stupid. She knows how these things work. Her father sold her like livestock. She'll do her duty, I'll do mine, and we'll both benefit from the arrangement. That's all there is to it. And if she wants more, if she expects, she'll learn to expect nothing. Luca's voice turned hard as steel. I've made no promises of affection, Marco. This marriage is business. Period. The sooner everyone accepts that, the smoother things will go. Footsteps approached the door. Adriana jerked back, her heart hammering so hard she was sure they could hear it in the next room. She snatched up her bouquet with shaking hands, pressed herself against the opposite wall, forced her face into something resembling composure. The door opened fully. Marco emerged first, straightening his tie, then Luca in his custom-made tuxedo, looking every inch the Prince of Chicago's underworld. Their eyes swept past her without really seeing her, two men heading toward their destinies with the confidence of those who'd never doubted their place in the world. Adriana stood frozen, her wedding dress suddenly feeling less like a gown and more like a shroud. I don't want her. I never did. The words echoed in the hollow space where her hopes had been. She'd been a fool, not for agreeing to this marriage, but for believing it could ever be anything more than exactly what Luca had described. A transaction, a business deal, her body and name exchanged for territory and power. Her father appeared at the end of the corridor, resplendent in his tuxedo, his face creased with satisfaction. Salvatore Moretti had orchestrated the deal of a lifetime, trading his daughter for an empire. Adriana, Bella, are you ready? He extended his arm, his smile wide and proud. The most important day of your life. She looked at him, really looked at him, and wondered if he'd known, if he'd understood that he was handing her to a man who viewed her as nothing more than a line item on a contract. But of course he'd known. Men like her father didn't deal in love or even basic human dignity. They dealt in power, and daughters were currency. Adriana took her father's arm. Her hands had stopped shaking. Something cold and hard had crystallized in her chest, replacing the hurt, replacing the humiliation. If Luca de Rossi wanted a transaction, she'd give him one. If he wanted a wife who understood her place, who expected nothing, who would keep her mouth shut and do her duty, fine. She would be exactly that. But she would survive this. She would endure. And she would never ever beg for his affection. The cathedral doors swung open. 300 faces turned toward her. The organs swelled with Pachelbel's cannon. Rose petals littered the white runner leading to the altar where Luca stood, tall and devastating and completely untouchable. Adriana lifted her chin and began the long walk toward her future. She'd heard women describe this moment as magical, transformative, the most beautiful experience of their lives. But as Adriana moved down that endless aisle, all she felt was the weight of inevitability. Each step was a choice to survive rather than surrender. Each breath was a small act of defiance against the men who'd reduced her to collateral. Luca watched her approach with those unreadable dark eyes. His expression was perfect. The right amount of appreciation, the correct degree of solemnity. To everyone watching, he looked like a groom awaiting his bride. Only Adriana knew the truth. Only she understood that the man waiting for her at that altar felt nothing but the satisfaction of a deal about to close. Her father delivered her to Luca's side with a firm handshake, the gesture of one businessman to another. Then he stepped back, leaving Adriana alone with the man who didn't want her. The priest began the ceremony. Adriana heard none of it. She was too busy memorizing the planes of Luca's face, the set of his shoulders, the way his hand felt when he took hers, warm, strong, completely impersonal. This was the man she'd spend the rest of her life with, this stranger who looked at her like she was a particularly nice piece of furniture. Do you, Luca Antonio de Rossi, take this woman? I do. His voice was steady, sure, the voice of a man making a business decision he was completely comfortable with. And do you, Adriana Sofia Moretti, take this man? She could say no. Could turn around, walk back down that aisle, destroy both families' carefully laid plans, could choose freedom over this gilded cage. But freedom for what? To go where? To do what? She was Salvatore Moretti's daughter. There was no escape from that, no redemption from the world she'd been born into. At least as Luca's wife, she'd have a name, a position, a kind of power, even if it was borrowed. I do. The words tasted like ash, but she said them clearly, firmly. If she was going to do this, she'd do it with her head high. Luca slipped the ring onto her finger, a massive diamond surrounded by smaller stones, beautiful and cold and expensive, a shackle made of platinum and promises. I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride. Luca turned to her, and for just a moment, something flickered in his eyes. Doubt? Regret? But it was gone before she could identify it, replaced by that same distant appreciation. He cupped her face with one hand, tilted her chin up, and kissed her. It was perfect. Passionate enough to satisfy the crowd, restrained enough to maintain dignity. His lips were warm, skilled, completely detached. She might as well have been kissing a statue. When he pulled back, the crowd erupted in applause. Luca took her hand and turned them both toward the assembled guests, presenting Chicago's newest power couple. Adriana smiled, the expression practiced and perfect, while inside her something fundamental shifted. She was Mrs. Luca de Rossi now, the bride who wasn't wanted, the wife who was nothing more than a business acquisition. But she was alive. She was standing, and that, she decided, would have to be enough. The reception was held at the Drake Hotel, the ballroom transformed into something out of a fairy tale. Thousands of white roses, crystal chandeliers, champagne, flowing like water. Adriana moved through it all like a ghost in white lace, accepting congratulations she didn't feel, dancing with men who looked at her with new respect now that she belonged to Luca de Rossi. Her husband played his part perfectly. He kept his hand on the small of her back, guided her through the crowd, introduced her to business associates and family members. To everyone watching, they were the picture of a perfect match. No one could see the ice between them, the careful distance he maintained even when holding her close. The first dance was torture. Luca held her properly, moved with practiced grace, said all the right things when people were listening. But when the music swelled and he pulled her closer, when their faces were inches apart and anyone watching would assume intimacy, he whispered, "You look beautiful. You've played your part well." Played her part, as if she were an actress in his production, not his wife. "Thank you," she said, matching his tone. "So have you." Something sharp crossed his features, gone too quickly to interpret. Then the song ended and he was leading her off the floor, delivering her to a group of wives who cooed over her dress and her ring and how lucky she was. Lucky. The word was a joke. The hours crawled by. Dinner, toasts, cake cutting, more dancing. Adriana drank just enough champagne to take the edge off without losing control. She laughed at appropriate moments, blushed when teased about the wedding night, played the role of blushing bride with the skill of someone who'd been trained for this her entire life. But when an older woman, the wife of one of Luca's business partners, leaned in and whispered, "Make him happy, dear, and he'll give you the world," Adriana nearly laughed. Make him happy? The man who'd married her like signing a contract? The man who'd told his lieutenant he didn't want her? "I'll do my best," she said instead, and the woman patted her hand with satisfaction. Finally, mercifully, the reception wound down. Luca's hand found the small of her back again as he guided her toward the exit. A limousine waited, festooned with white ribbons and just married signs. The crowd threw rose petals and rice. Cameras flashed. Everyone was smiling. Adriana climbed into the back of the limo, her dress pooling around her like sea foam. Luca settled beside her, and the door closed, sealing them in sudden silence. The driver pulled away from the curb. Through the tinted windows, Adriana watched Chicago slide past. Her city, her home, suddenly foreign now that everything had changed. "You did well tonight." Luca's voice broke the silence. He was looking at his phone, scrolling through messages. Business. Always business. "Thank you." She kept her voice neutral. "So did you." "The estate has been prepared for us. Your things were moved this afternoon. Maria will help you get settled. She's been with my family for 20 years. Trustworthy. Discreet." He was giving her a staff report. Adriana nodded, said nothing. "There will be a security briefing tomorrow. You'll need to understand the protocols, the safe rooms, the emergency procedures. Marco will handle that." Marco, his right-hand man, the one who'd been in the room when Luca said he didn't want her. "Of course." Luca finally looked up from his phone, studying her with those dark, unreadable eyes. "Do you have any questions?" 1,000, 1,000,000. "Why did you marry me if you don't want me? What did I do to deserve this? Will you ever see me as anything more than a strategic acquisition?" "No," she said. "I understand my role." Something flickered across his face again, That same strange expression from the ceremony, there and gone. Good. That will make things simpler. The rest of the drive passed in silence. Adriana stared out the window, watching the city give way to the suburbs, then to the gated estates of the truly wealthy. Finally, the limo turned through massive iron gates, down a tree-lined drive that seemed to go on forever. The house, no, the mansion, rose before them like something out of a dream, all stone and glass and impossible beauty, lit from within so it glowed against the night sky. This was her home now, her cage. Staff lined up to greet them. Maids, groundskeepers, security personnel, all perfectly turned out, all with the carefully neutral expressions of those who served dangerous men. Maria, the housekeeper Luca had mentioned, stepped forward with a warm smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Welcome home, Mrs. de Rossi." Mrs. de Rossi. The name still didn't feel real. "Thank you, Maria. I've prepared the mistress's suite. Would you like me to help you change?" Adriana nodded, grateful for any excuse to escape Luca's presence. She followed Maria through halls lined with priceless art, up a grand staircase down another corridor. The house was enormous, labyrinthine. She'd need weeks to learn her way around. The mistress's suite was stunning, all cream and gold with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking manicured gardens. A massive four-poster bed dominated the space, already turned down, rose petals scattered across the silk sheets. Someone's idea of romance. The thought made her want to laugh or cry, or both. Maria helped her out of the wedding dress with practiced efficiency, hanging it carefully before producing a nightgown. White silk and lace, beautiful and virginal, and completely impractical. "The master's suite is through that door," Maria said, gesturing to a connecting door Adriana hadn't noticed. "He said he'd join you shortly." Of course, the wedding night, the consummation, the final seal on their business transaction. Adriana's hands clenched in the silk of her nightgown. She wanted to run, to lock both doors, to throw something through those beautiful windows. But that would be emotion, and emotion was weakness. Luca had made it clear what he expected. A wife who understood her role, who did her duty without complaint. Fine, she could do that. She could give him exactly what he'd paid for. "Thank you, Maria. That will be all." When she was alone, Adriana stood in front of the full-length mirror and studied her reflection. The nightgown left little to the imagination, designed to entice and seduce. She looked like every man's fantasy, young, beautiful, innocent, ready to be claimed. The connecting door opened. Luca stood in the doorway, still in his tuxedo pants but shirtless now, revealing the kind of body that came from wealth and discipline and good genetics. He was beautiful in that dangerous way, all hard planes and controlled power. His eyes swept over her, that same distant appreciation, like admiring art he owned but felt nothing for. "You're ready." Not a question. "Yes." Her voice didn't shake. Small victory. He crossed the room in 3 strides, and suddenly he was there, close enough that she could smell his cologne, something expensive and masculine that made her head spin despite everything. His hand cupped her jaw, tilting her face up to meet his eyes. For a moment, they just looked at each other. This stranger who was now her husband, this woman who was now his wife. "I'll try not to hurt you," he said quietly. It might have been kindness, except she knew better now. This was just more duty, more obligation. He'd be gentle, because that was the civilized thing to do, not because he cared about her comfort. Adriana reached up and placed her hand over his, the massive diamond on her finger catching the light. "Do what you need to do," she said. "I understand what this is." His eyes darkened, and for just a second, she thought she saw something real flash through them. Anger? Regret? But then his mouth was on hers, and she stopped thinking entirely. The kiss was different from the one at their wedding, deeper, more demanding. His hands found her waist, pulled her against him, and she felt the heat of him through the thin silk of her nightgown. Her body responded despite her mind's protests, despite everything she knew. He lifted her easily, carried her to that ridiculous bed with its rose petals and silk sheets. Laid her down with surprising gentleness. His body covered hers, and she felt the weight of him, the power barely contained. Adriana. Her name, rough in his throat. She opened her eyes, met his gaze, saw something there she couldn't quite name, something that looked almost like hunger, almost like need. But that couldn't be right. He didn't want her. He'd said so himself. What followed was complicated. He was skilled, patient, careful with her inexperience, but there was a distance to it, a sense that he was performing a function rather than sharing intimacy. When it was over and he rolled away, lying on his back and staring at the ceiling, Adriana felt more alone than she had in her entire life. They lay in silence for long minutes. Then Luca stood, grabbed his discarded clothing, moved toward the connecting door. "Good night, Adriana." "Good night." The door closed behind him with a soft click. Adriana stared at the ceiling, her body still humming with unfamiliar sensations, her heart locked behind walls she was building higher by the second. Tears pricked her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Crying was emotion, and emotion was weakness, and she needed to be strong. This was her life now. Beautiful prison, distant husband, duty performed and obligation fulfilled. She'd survived the wedding. She'd survived the first night. Tomorrow, she'd wake up and do it again. And again. And again. Until survival became its own kind of victory. 3 months had passed since the wedding, and Adriana had learned to navigate the vast emptiness of her new life with the precision of a soldier crossing a minefield. The de Rossi estate had become familiar in the way prisons become familiar to their inmates. She knew every corridor, every room, every escape route that led nowhere. Her days followed a rhythm as precise as it was hollow. She woke alone in the mistress's suite, the connecting door to Luca's room always closed. Maria would arrive with breakfast and the day's schedule. Charity events, social obligations, the endless performance of being Mrs. Luca de Rossi. Adriana played her part flawlessly. She wore the right clothes, said the right things, smiled at the right people. She was everything a mob wife should be, beautiful, gracious, and completely invisible. The nights were worse. Luca came to her bedroom twice a week, always after midnight, always with that same distant courtesy. He was never rough, never cruel, but he was never present either, not really. He touched her body while keeping himself completely removed, like a man going through motions he found necessary but unenjoyable. Afterward, he always left, returning to his own suite without a word beyond good night. They lived in the same house but occupied different worlds. Luca left early for business she wasn't allowed to know about and returned late smelling of cigars and expensive scotch. When they crossed paths, at breakfast occasionally, at required social events, they spoke with the polite formality of acquaintances. He asked if she needed anything. She always said no. He told her she looked nice. She thanked him. Then they retreated to their separate corners. The staff walked on eggshells around them, clearly aware that something was wrong even if they'd never say it. Maria tried, in her way, to make Adriana comfortable, but there was only so much a housekeeper could do for a woman dying of loneliness in a palace. It was a Tuesday afternoon in late November when things began to shift. Adriana was in the library, her favorite room in the entire estate, floor-to-ceiling books and leather furniture that smelled of old paper and possibility. She'd been reading, trying to lose herself in someone else's story, when voices drifted in from the hallway. "The shipment arrives Friday. We need to move it through the warehouse before the feds get wind." That was Marco, his voice instantly recognizable. "Double the security. The Castellanos are looking for any excuse to make a move." Luca's response was clipped, authoritative. Adriana froze, the book forgotten in her lap. She knew better than to eavesdrop on business discussions. Luca had made it clear on their wedding night that she was to know nothing about his operations, to hear nothing, see nothing, remember nothing. Wives who asked questions ended up in expensive coffins, but she couldn't help herself. After 3 months of silence and distance, even the sound of his voice discussing illegal shipments was better than nothing. "What about your wife?" Marco asked. "She's been here 3 months. You trust her?" Adriana's breath caught. She pressed herself against the side of the leather chair, hidden from the doorway but able to hear every word. "She knows her place." Luca's tone was dismissive. "Adriana's smart enough to keep her head down and her mouth shut. She's not a problem." "You're sure? The Moretti girl seemed awfully interested in your office the other day. Maria said she was asking about the locked wing." "That was true," Adriana had asked, purely out of boredom, what lay behind the doors she wasn't allowed to open. Maria had deflected gracefully, but apparently the question had made its way back to Luca. "I'll handle it." A pause. Adriana understands what's expected of her. She's been perfect since the wedding. Compliant, quiet, exactly what I needed. The words hit like physical blows. Compliant, quiet, exactly what I needed. Not wanted, needed, like furniture that served its function without complaint. "Still," Marco pressed, "maybe you should spend more time with her." People are starting to talk. 3 months married and you barely look at each other. People can talk all they want. My marriage is none of their concern. It becomes their concern when it looks weak, when it looks like the great Luca de Rossi can't even control his own wife. I control everything that matters. Luca's voice had gone cold, dangerous. Adriana does what she's told, appears where she's supposed to, and stays out of my business. That's all I require. Their footsteps retreated down the hall, leaving Adriana alone with the crushing weight of reality. 3 months, and nothing had changed. She was still just an acquisition, a pretty accessory to be trotted out when needed and ignored the rest of the time. She stayed in the library until dinner, which she ate alone in the formal dining room at a table that could seat 20. The food was exquisite. The de Rossi chef had been trained in Paris, but it all tasted like ash. Everything did lately. That night, Luca didn't come to her room. Or the next night, or the one after that. A week passed with no visits, no acknowledgement beyond a brief nod when they passed in the hallway. Adriana told herself she was relieved. Those clinical encounters had become almost unbearable. The physical intimacy without emotional connection, a special kind of torture. But she also wondered what she'd done wrong. Had Maria reported her questions about the locked wing? Was Luca punishing her for showing curiosity? Or had he simply lost interest in maintaining even the pretense of a normal marriage? She got her answer 2 weeks later at a charity gala at the Four Seasons. The event was a who's who of Chicago's elite, both legitimate and otherwise, all gathered to throw money at some cause or another while really conducting business in the shadows. Adriana wore a red dress that cost more than most people's cars, diamonds at her throat that could have bought a house. She looked every inch the mob princess, poised and perfect, and utterly empty inside. Luca had barely looked at her during the car ride over, consumed by his phone and whatever crisis demanded his attention. At the gala, he guided her through the crowd with a hand on her back, introduced her to people whose names she'd forget immediately, then disappeared into a private room with a cluster of men who all had the same predatory gleam in their eyes. Adriana was left with the wives. They welcomed her with air kisses and compliments that cut like knives, asking pointed questions about married life, about Luca, about when they might expect to hear the pitter-patter of little feet. She smiled and deflected, giving them nothing while dying inside. "Your husband is very attentive," one woman said, her eyes glittering with malice. "So different from when he was with Valentina." The name hit like a slap. Adriana kept her expression neutral, but inside her mind was racing. "I'm sorry, I don't know." "Oh, you didn't know?" The woman's smile widened. "Valentina Russo. They were together for 2 years before your marriage. Everyone thought they'd end up together, but then your family offered such a lucrative deal, and, well," she shrugged. "Business is business." The other wives watched Adriana carefully, waiting for a reaction, feeding on any sign of distress. She gave them nothing. Years of her father's training had taught her how to bleed internally while maintaining a perfect facade. "How interesting," Adriana said smoothly. "If you'll excuse me, I need to freshen up." She walked, didn't run, wouldn't give them the satisfaction, to the ladies' room, locked herself in a stall and braced her hands against the walls, breathing through the revelation. Luca had been in love with someone else. Someone he'd given up because marrying Adriana was better business. The coldness, the distance, the way he touched her like she was a stranger. It all made horrible sense now. He wasn't just uninterested, he was mourning what he'd lost. The bathroom door opened. Voices filtered in, low and conspiratorial. "Did you see her face?" That was the woman who'd dropped Valentina's name. "Like a kicked puppy." "I almost feel sorry for her. She has no idea what she walked into." A different voice, younger, tinged with sympathy. "Please." She got exactly what she signed up for. Money, status, the de Rossi name. So what if Luca still sees Valentina? Smart wives look the other way. Adriana's world tilted. Still sees Valentina. "Does she know?" the younger woman asked. "I doubt it. Luca's been very discreet. Wednesday afternoons, that little apartment in Gold Coast. Everyone knows but the wife." Adriana didn't remember leaving the bathroom, navigating back through the gala, finding a quiet alcove where she could process what she'd heard. Luca was having an affair with his ex-girlfriend. Every Wednesday, while Adriana sat alone in that massive house, playing the perfect wife to a man who was giving his attention to someone else. She should have been devastated, should have felt betrayed, heartbroken, destroyed. But instead, she felt something else entirely, a cold, crystalline clarity. This was what she'd married into. This was the transaction. She was the legitimate wife, the one who gave him heirs and respectability. Valentina, whoever she was, could have the rest. Except Adriana found she couldn't quite make peace with that. Not because she loved Luca. How could she love someone who'd never given her a chance? But because the humiliation of it burned. The wives knew. The staff probably knew. All of Chicago's underworld elite knew that Luca de Rossi's wife was so inadequate he had to seek comfort elsewhere. She was still standing in the alcove, her mind churning with dark thoughts, when she felt eyes on her. She turned to find a man watching her, not Luca, someone else. Tall, handsome in a polished way, with calculating eyes that reminded her uncomfortably of her father. "You look like you could use a drink," he said, approaching with a champagne flute in each hand. Adriana recognized him vaguely from the introductions earlier. Someone important in Luca's world, though the details escaped her. "I'm fine, thank you." "Are you?" He smiled, and it wasn't kind. "You're Adriana de Rossi, the beautiful bride everyone's talking about." "People always talk." "They do, especially when there's something interesting to say." He moved closer, too close, invading her space in a way that made her skin crawl. "Your husband is occupied with business. Seems a shame to leave such a lovely woman unattended." Warning bells rang in Adriana's head. This was a test, she realized, a trap. Men like this didn't approach the wives of men like Luca unless they were looking to cause trouble or prove something. "My husband is always occupied with business," she said coolly. "I'm quite used to entertaining myself." "I'm sure you are." His eyes traveled over her in a way that made her feel exposed despite the conservative cut of her dress. "But if you ever need company—" "She doesn't." Luca's voice cut through the space like a blade. Adriana turned to find her husband standing behind her, his expression carved from ice. The temperature in the alcove dropped 20 degrees. The other man stepped back immediately, hands raised in mock surrender. "De Rossi, I was just making conversation with your lovely wife." "I saw what you were doing." Luca's hand found Adriana's waist, pulled her against his side with possessive force. "And you're done." No offense meant, "Get out of my sight before I take offense anyway." The man disappeared into the crowd with the speed of someone who recognized real danger. Luca's hand remained on Adriana's waist, his grip just shy of painful. "Are you all right?" His voice was still cold, but there was something underneath it now. Something that might have been concern if Adriana didn't know better. "I'm fine. I can handle myself." "That's not the point." He steered her away from the alcove toward a private corner where they could talk without being overheard. That was Antonio Castellano, one of the most dangerous men in Chicago. You don't engage with him. You don't make conversation. You don't even make eye contact. "He approached me," Adriana shot back, her own anger rising. "What was I supposed to do? Run away screaming?" "You were supposed to find me immediately." "Oh yes, of course, because you're so easy to find when you're locked in back rooms conducting your precious business." The words came out sharper than she'd intended, 3 months of frustration bleeding through her careful control. Luca's eyes narrowed. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing. I apologize. I understand my place. Stay quiet, look pretty, don't cause problems. I'll try to do better." She started to pull away, but his grip on her waist tightened. "Adriana, Mrs. de Rossi, there you are!" Maria appeared as if summoned, her face carefully neutral but her eyes knowing. "Your car is ready whenever you'd like to leave." Adriana seized the escape route gratefully. "Thank you, Maria. I have a headache. I'd like to go home." Luca's jaw tightened, but he released her. "I'll have the driver take you. I need to stay." "Of course you do." She was already walking away, her heels clicking against the marble floor like gunshots. "Don't let me interrupt your important business." The drive home was silent except for the sound of Chicago passing by outside the tinted windows. Adriana stared at her reflection in the glass. Beautiful, hollow, a woman playing dress-up in someone else's life. When had she become this person? When had survival started to feel like slow death? The estate was quiet when she arrived. Maria had ridden ahead and was waiting with a concerned expression that Adriana waved away. She went straight to her suite, kicked off the uncomfortable heels, and stood at the window overlooking the grounds. Somewhere out there, in a little apartment in Gold Coast, Luca kept another woman. A woman he'd chosen, a woman he wanted, A woman who got all the parts of him Adriana would never see. The rational part of her mind said this didn't matter. She'd married him knowing it was a transaction. But the rest of her, the part that was still young and stupid enough to hope, burned with humiliation. She was still standing at the window an hour later when she heard the connecting door open. Luca entered without knocking. It was his house, after all, his wife, his right to enter whenever he pleased. "You left without saying goodbye," he said. "You were busy." She didn't turn around, didn't want him to see her face. "I didn't want to interrupt. Adriana, look at me." She did finally, turning to face him. He'd removed his jacket and tie, looked almost human in just his dress shirt and slacks. Almost like a husband coming home to his wife, almost. "What happened tonight?" he asked. "Nothing happened. I had a headache. I came home." "Don't lie to me." He moved closer, studying her face. "Something's wrong. You've been different lately. Distant." The irony of him accusing her of being distant nearly made her laugh. Instead, she met his eyes and told him a truth, if not the whole truth. "I'm tired, Luca. Tired of pretending. Tired of playing house. Tired of this entire charade." His expression hardened. "It's not a charade. We're married." "Are we?" The question hung in the air between them, sharp and dangerous. Because married people usually spend time together, talk to each other, pretend to care about each other's lives. We're just two strangers who happen to share a house. "What did you expect?" His voice had gone cold again, defensive. "This is what we agreed to. I agreed to a marriage, not to being invisible." "You're not invisible. You're right here. You have everything you could possibly want. Everything except a husband who actually wants me." The words exploded out of her before she could stop them. 3 months of silence and swallowed pain erupting all at once. "I heard you, Luca, on our wedding day talking to Marco. I heard you say you didn't want me, that I was just a strategic acquisition, that this marriage was nothing but business." His face went white, then red, then utterly blank. "You heard that. Every word. So don't stand here and act like I'm being unreasonable for feeling exactly like what you made me, a piece of property you bought, and now ignore." "Adriana, I'm not finished." She was on a roll now, all the anger and hurt pouring out in a flood she couldn't control. "I have been the perfect wife. I've done everything you asked. I've stayed quiet, stayed out of your business, smiled for the cameras, spread my legs twice a week like clockwork. I've asked for nothing, expected nothing, and gotten exactly nothing in return. So forgive me if I'm tired of this charade, if I'm tired of being married to a ghost." Luca stared at her, something dangerous building in his eyes. "You want to know why I said those things? Why I told Marco I didn't want you? I already know. You were in love with Valentina Russo. You gave her up to marry me because my father offered a better deal. Business over love. I understand. I do. But that doesn't make it hurt any less that everyone in Chicago knows you still see her every Wednesday while I sit here alone wondering what I did to deserve this." The silence that followed was deafening. Luca stood frozen, his face a mask of shock and something else, something that looked almost like panic. "Who told you about Valentina?" His voice was barely above a whisper. "Does it matter?" "Everyone knows, Luca. Everyone except the stupid wife." Adriana turned back to the window, exhausted suddenly. "Go back to your room, or go to her. I don't care anymore. Just leave me alone." She heard him move, expected the connecting door to slam. Instead, his hands landed on her shoulders, spinning her around to face him. His eyes were dark, intense, burning with something she'd never seen before. "I am not seeing Valentina," he said, each word carefully enunciated. "I haven't seen her since a week before our wedding when I told her it was over. Whoever told you I spend Wednesdays with her is lying, trying to cause problems, drive a wedge between us." Adriana wanted to believe him, but trust was a luxury she couldn't afford. "Then where do you go? Every Wednesday afternoon you disappear for hours. Where, Luca?" His jaw worked, muscles tightening. For a long moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "Physical therapy." "What?" "I got shot. 3 years ago, a deal gone bad. The bullet shattered my shoulder, did nerve damage. I've been in PT ever since, trying to regain full mobility." He pulled up his sleeve, revealing a brutal scar that wrapped around his shoulder. "This is where I go on Wednesdays. Not to my ex-girlfriend, to a therapist who works on this so I can still use my arm." Adriana stared at the scar, feeling the world tilt again. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because it's weakness. Because in my world, weakness gets you killed. Because I don't. He cut himself off, something flickering across his face. Because you don't what? Because I don't want you to see me as weak. The admission seemed torn from him, raw and painful. I don't want anyone to see me as weak, but especially not you. Why especially not me? I'm just the woman you bought, remember? The strategic acquisition. Why would it matter what I think? Luca's hands tightened on her shoulders, his eyes searching her face with an intensity that made her breath catch. Because somewhere in the last 3 months, it started mattering. Because I can't stop thinking about you. Because I lie in my room at night and hear you moving around in here and want to come to you, not for duty, but because I miss you. Because I'm terrified of what you're becoming to me. Adriana's heart hammered against her ribs. What am I becoming? Everything I can't afford to lose. His thumb traced her jawline, the touch gentle despite the violence she knew those hands were capable of. I told Marco I didn't want you because I was already starting to want you too much. Because wanting you made me vulnerable in ways I've never been vulnerable before. Because I looked at you walking down that aisle and felt something I've spent my entire adult life avoiding, genuine fear that something might happen to you. But you've been so cold, because cold keeps you safe, cold keeps distance. Cold means if something happens to you, it won't destroy me the way my mother's death destroyed my father. His forehead came to rest against hers, his breath warm on her lips. I've been trying to protect both of us by keeping you at arm's length, but it's not working, Adriana. You're under my skin, in my head, in my... He didn't finish the sentence, but Adriana heard what he couldn't say. She pulled back just enough to look into his eyes and saw the truth there. Fear and longing and something that might, with time and trust, become love. The phone call, she whispered. Before you even answer, you know it's about business. You know it could be bad news, danger, threats, and you still answer because that's your world. That's the life you've built. Yes. And you're afraid that caring about me gives your enemies a weapon to use against you. Yes. His hand cupped her face now, holding her gaze. I've seen what happens to men in my position who love too openly. I've watched them make stupid decisions, compromise operations, get themselves and everyone around them killed because they put one person above everything else. So you tried not to care. I tried. A bitter smile twisted his lips. It didn't work. When Antonio Castellano approached you tonight, when I saw him touching you, looking at you like... His jaw clenched. I wanted to kill him right there in the middle of the gala. Consequences be damned. That's when I knew I'd already lost this fight. Adriana's breath hitched. Luca. The sharp trill of his phone cut through the moment. He pulled it out, glanced at the screen, and his entire demeanor changed. The man who'd just bared his soul disappeared, replaced by the crime boss who ruled Chicago's underworld. I have to take this. He was already moving toward the connecting door. We'll talk more. When? Tomorrow? Next week? 3 months from now. Adriana heard the bitterness in her own voice. Some things never change. He stopped, turned back. Tomorrow. I promise. No interruptions, just us. Then he was gone, the door closing behind him, leaving Adriana alone with revelations that changed everything and nothing. He cared. He'd admitted it, shown vulnerability she'd never expected. But caring wasn't enough if he'd never choose her over business, never put their relationship before his empire. She climbed into bed still wearing her dress, too exhausted to change. Tomorrow, he'd said. They'd talk tomorrow. She wanted to believe it, wanted to trust that something fundamental had shifted between them. But she'd learned not to hope for things that men like Luca could never give. Sleep came fitfully, full of dreams where she ran through endless corridors calling his name, where he stood just out of reach no matter how fast she moved. She woke to weak November sunlight and the sound of shouting from somewhere in the house. Adriana bolted upright, her heart racing. More shouting, the crash of something breaking. She grabbed her robe and rushed to the door, yanking it open just as Marco appeared in the hallway, his face grim. Mrs. De Rossi, you need to stay in your room. What's happening? There's been a situation. The boss is handling it. Please, just... Marco! Luca's voice sharp as a gunshot. Get her to the safe room. Now! Safe room. That meant danger. Real danger. What's going on? Adriana demanded as Marco took her arm, trying to steer her down the hallway. Just precaution, ma'am. Everything's under control. But it wasn't. She could hear it in the controlled chaos around her. Security personnel moving with weapons drawn, staff being hustled into protected areas, the low urgent voices of men preparing for violence. They rounded a corner, and Adriana saw Luca in the foyer below, surrounded by his men, all of them armed. He was on his phone, barking orders, his face hard as stone. Then he looked up and saw her, and something in his expression made her blood run cold. Fear. Real, genuine fear. "Get her secured," he called up to Marco. "The Castellanos know about the shipment. They're moving against us. They might—" The front window exploded inward, glass showering everywhere. Gunfire erupted, deafening in the enclosed space. Marco threw himself over Adriana, dragging her to the floor as bullets tore through the air above them. Adriana's scream was lost in the chaos. She caught a glimpse of Luca diving behind the marble staircase, returning fire with deadly precision. More windows shattered. Men shouted. Someone screamed. Then Marco was hauling her up, practically carrying her down a back hallway toward what she assumed was the safe room. Behind them, the battle raged, her husband fighting for his life while she ran to hide. She thought about his confession last night, about his admission that she'd become everything he couldn't afford to lose, and she prayed, despite everything, despite all their broken pieces, that they'd both live long enough for tomorrow to come. The safe room was buried deep in the heart of the estate, accessed through a hidden panel in what appeared to be a linen closet. Marco shoved Adriana through the reinforced steel door, his gun already drawn, his eyes scanning the corridor behind them for threats. "Stay here," he ordered, his voice clipped and professional. "Don't open this door for anyone except me or the boss. Not even if they say they're security. Not even if they say it's safe. You understand?" "Marco, what's happening out there? Is Luca—" "The boss can handle himself. He's been doing this since before you were born." But there was tension in Marco's shoulders, fear beneath the professional mask. "Lock this behind me. The code to open it from inside is your wedding date. Don't forget it." Then he was gone, the heavy door swinging shut with a pneumatic hiss that sounded like a tomb ceiling. Adriana spun the lock with trembling fingers and backed away, her heart hammering so hard she could feel it in her throat. The safe room was larger than she'd expected, maybe 20 feet square, lined with concrete and steel, no windows, just fluorescent lights that hummed with artificial brightness. There were supplies here, water, canned food, a first aid kit that looked military grade, blankets, a cot, everything someone would need to survive for days if necessary. The thought made her stomach turn. Days. She might be trapped here for days while Luca fought whatever war had erupted in their home. She pressed her ear against the door, straining to hear anything from outside. The thick steel muffled everything, reducing the chaos to distant thuds and muted pops that might have been gunfire or might have been her imagination. She had no way of knowing if Luca was hurt, if he was even alive. The man who'd confessed last night that she'd become everything he couldn't afford to lose. The man who'd kept her at arm's length to protect them both. The man who was out there right now, possibly bleeding, possibly dying, while she hid like a coward. Adriana sank onto the cot, wrapped her arms around herself and tried to breathe through the panic clawing at her chest. This was the life she'd married into. This was the reality of being Mrs. Luca de Rossi. Violence and danger and the constant threat of losing everything in a heartbeat. Hours crawled by. Adriana had no way to track time in this concrete box. No phone, no windows, nothing but the relentless buzz of fluorescent lights and her own spiraling thoughts. She paced, sat, paced again. Checked the supplies, counted the water bottles, read the labels on the canned goods without really seeing them. Anything to keep her mind from imagining Luca dead on their marble floor. When the knock finally came, it nearly stopped her heart. 3 raps, pause, 2 raps. Some kind of code she didn't know. "Mrs. de Rossi, it's Marco. You can open the door." She wanted to believe him, but his own words echoed in her mind. "Don't open this door for anyone except me or the boss. Not even if they say they're security." "How do I know it's really you?" she called through the steel. A pause. Then, "Your wedding night, the boss came back to his room and sat in the dark for an hour before I found him. He told me he'd made a mistake, that keeping you at distance was going to destroy you both. I told him distance was safer. He said some things weren't worth staying safe from." Adriana's breath caught. That was too specific, too private to be anything but truth. Her hands shook as she punched in the code. The date she'd married a man who didn't want her. The date that had started this entire nightmare. The door swung open. Marco stood there, his suit jacket torn, blood on his shirt that she prayed wasn't his. Behind him, the hallway was eerily quiet. Is he? She couldn't finish the question. He's alive. Hurt, but alive. He's asking for you. Adriana didn't wait for more. She pushed past Marco and ran, her bare feet slapping against marble floors littered with broken glass and bullet casings. The main foyer looked like a war zone, shattered windows, walls pocked with bullet holes, furniture destroyed. Two bodies lay covered with sheets, their identities hidden, but their stillness absolute. She found Luca in his study, surrounded by his remaining men. A doctor bent over him, applying pressure to a wound on his side. His shirt was soaked with blood, his face pale but his eyes alert, furious. Need to hit them back immediately, he was saying, his voice tight with pain. The Castellanos need to understand that attacking my home has consequences. I want... He broke off when he saw her, something shifting in his expression. Relief, quickly masked, but she'd seen it. Adriana, you shouldn't be here. Where else would I be? She pushed through the wall of men, ignoring their protests, until she stood beside him. The wound in his side was bleeding through the bandages the doctor was applying, red blooming against white gauze. How bad is it? Flesh wound. I've had worse. That's not what I asked. She turned to the doctor, an older man with steady hands and kind eyes. How bad? The bullet went clean through. No major organs hit. He'll need stitches, antibiotics, rest. The doctor's tone made it clear he knew the last item on that list was unlikely to happen. Then do what you need to do. Adriana pulled up a chair and sat, making it clear she wasn't leaving. Luca's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. He watched her as the doctor worked, cleaning the wound, stitching torn flesh with practiced efficiency. Adriana held his gaze, refusing to look away, even when his pain showed through his careful control. When the doctor finished and the room finally cleared, just Marco remaining by the door, Luca reached for her hand. His grip was weak, his palm slick with sweat, but he held on like she was the only thing anchoring him to the world. I'm sorry, he said quietly. This isn't what you signed up for. Actually, it's exactly what I signed up for. I married a crime boss. This comes with the territory. She squeezed his hand gently. What I didn't sign up for was caring whether you lived or died. But apparently I don't get to choose that either. His thumb traced circles on her palm, the gesture almost unconscious. When I saw the Castellanos' men breach the perimeter, when I realized they might get to you before we could lock you down, he closed his eyes briefly. I understood what my father felt when my mother died. That terror, that absolute certainty that losing you would break something in me that could never be fixed. Luca, I meant what I said last night, every word. You've become everything I swore I'd never let anyone become. He opened his eyes, and they were raw, honest, stripped of all his usual defenses. I don't know how to do this. How to love you and keep you safe. How to be the man you need and the man my family needs. But I'm tired of pretending I don't want to try. The word love hung in the air between them, massive and terrifying, and exactly what Adriana had been craving since the moment she'd heard him say he didn't want her. Then try, she said simply. Stop protecting me from yourself. Stop pushing me away because you're afraid. Let me in, Luca. Let me be your partner, not just your wife. If I do that, if I let you see all of it, the business, the violence, the choices I have to make, you might not like what you find. Then let me decide that for myself. She leaned closer, careful not to jostle his injury. I'm stronger than you think, stronger than you've let me be. Stop treating me like a fragile acquisition and start treating me like someone who chose to fight beside you. Something fierce and possessive flared in his eyes. You didn't choose. Your father sold you to me. Maybe. But I'm choosing now. I'm choosing to stay, to stand with you, to be more than just the woman you bought. She brought his hand to her lips, pressed a kiss to his blood-stained knuckles. I'm choosing you, Luca. Even knowing what that means, even knowing the danger, I'm choosing this. He pulled her down to him, kissed her with a desperation that had nothing to do with duty and everything to do with need. His hands tangled in her hair, held her like she might disappear if he let go. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathing hard. The Castellanos won't stop, he said, his voice rough. This was just the opening move. They want the territories your father gave me, want to destabilize my operations. They'll come after anything they think I care about. Then we'll be ready. Though we felt natural, right? But right now you need to rest. Doctor's orders. I need to coordinate the response. The longer we wait, the weaker we look. Marco can handle it for a few hours. She glanced at Luca's second in command, who nodded fractionally. You're no good to anyone if you collapse from blood loss. Luca looked like he wanted to argue, but exhaustion and pain were catching up with him. A few hours, he conceded. Then we plan our response. Adriana helped him to his feet, supported him as they made their way through the destroyed foyer toward the stairs. The bodies were gone now, the blood being cleaned up by staff who'd clearly done this before. It should have horrified her. Instead, she felt only a cold determination to ensure this never happened again. Getting Luca up the stairs was an exercise in stubborn pride meeting physical limitation. He refused to lean on her too heavily, refused to show weakness even though they both knew she'd already seen him at his most vulnerable. By the time they reached his suite, not hers, his, they were both trembling with effort. She'd never been in his room before. It was larger than hers, more masculine, dominated by a massive bed and floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the grounds. Personal touches were minimal. A few books, a photograph of a woman who had to be his mother, expensive but impersonal furnishings. Adriana helped him onto the bed, carefully avoiding his injured side. He caught her wrist when she started to pull away. Stay. I'm not going anywhere. No, I mean... He tugged her down beside him, positioned her carefully against his uninjured side. Stay. Here. With me. I'm done sleeping alone. Done pretending distance makes us safer. If the Castellanos want to use you against me, they'll do it whether we're in separate rooms or not. Adriana settled against him, her head on his shoulder, careful not to hurt him. This is going to complicate things. Things are already complicated. His arm came around her, held her close. At least this way, we're complicated together. They lay in silence for a while, Adriana listening to his heartbeat, strong and steady despite everything. Outside, she could hear Marco's voice giving orders, security being reinforced, the machinery of Luca's empire grinding into motion. Tell me about the Castellanos, she said quietly. Everything. No more secrets. Luca was quiet for so long she thought he might refuse. Then, Antonio Castellano is the head of the family, ambitious, ruthless, not as smart as he thinks he is. He's been trying to expand his territory for years, but I've blocked him at every turn. When I married you, when I absorbed your father's operations, it cut off his last avenue for expansion. So this is about more than just territory. It's about power, respect. In our world, the two are inseparable. His fingers traced idle patterns on her arm. Antonio sees me as an obstacle. He thinks if he can destabilize my operations, kill enough of my men, make me look weak, others will turn on me. It's how these things work. Show any vulnerability and the sharks start circling. And I'm a vulnerability now. You were always a vulnerability. I just didn't want to admit it. He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. But you're also a strength. You were magnificent this morning, Adriana. Most women in your position would have fallen apart. You stayed calm, followed Marco's instructions, kept yourself safe. That matters. I was terrified the entire time. Being brave doesn't mean not being afraid. It means being afraid and doing what needs to be done anyway. His voice was getting drowsy, pain medication and exhaustion pulling him under. You're stronger than I gave you credit for, stronger than I deserved. Sleep, she whispered. I'll be here when you wake up. Promise? I promise. She felt him relax, his breathing evening out as sleep claimed him. Adriana stayed perfectly still, afraid to disturb him, her mind churning with everything that had happened in the last 24 hours. Last night, Luca had admitted he was falling for her. This morning, someone had tried to kill them both. And now she lay in his bed, in his arms, finally granted the intimacy she'd craved but terrified of what it might cost them. Her phone buzzed from somewhere in her robe pocket. She extracted it carefully, not wanting to wake Luca. A text from an unknown number made her blood run cold. Beautiful dress you wore to the gala. Red always did suit you. Shame about your husband's injury. Next time we won't miss. Adriana's hand tightened on the phone. The Castellanos were watching her, had been watching her. They knew what she wore, where she went, probably every move she made outside the estate. The threat was clear. Luca might have survived this attack, but there would be others. She should tell him, should wake him up and show him the text immediately. But he needed rest, needed time to heal before the next battle. And besides, she was beginning to form a plan of her own. If the Castellanos saw her as Luca's weakness, maybe it was time to make them understand she could be his weapon too. Marco was waiting in the hallway when she finally extracted herself from Luca's side an hour later. The older man's expression was unreadable, but his eyes tracked her rumpled robe, her bare feet, the obvious fact that she'd been in the boss's bed. "He's sleeping," she said before Marco could ask. "Don't wake him unless it's an emergency." "Yes, ma'am." A pause. "The estate is secure. We've tripled the guards, installed new surveillance. Nothing's getting through our perimeter again." "Good." Adriana pulled out her phone, showed him the text. "They're watching me. They know my movements outside the estate." Marco's face darkened. "I'll have our tech people trace it, but these things are usually burners. Dead ends." "I expected as much," she pocketed the phone. "But it gives us information. They're confident enough to taunt us, which means they think they have the upper hand. People who have the upper hand make mistakes." Marco studied her with new interest. "You sound like the boss." "I'm learning from the best." She met his gaze directly. "I need you to teach me, Marco. Everything. How this world works, who the players are, what leverage we have. Luca's been trying to protect me by keeping me ignorant, but ignorance doesn't keep me safe. Knowledge does." The boss won't like it." "The boss doesn't get to like it, or not like it. This is my life too. I'm already a target. I might as well be a useful one." A slow smile crossed Marco's face, the first genuine expression she'd ever seen from him. "You know what? I think you might actually survive this world after all, Mrs. De Rossi." "I don't want to just survive, Marco. I want to win." Over the next week, while Luca recovered from his injury, Adriana got a crash course in the Chicago underworld. Marco proved to be a patient, if demanding, teacher, walking her through the complex web of alliances and rivalries that governed their world. She learned which families could be trusted, which ones were looking for any excuse to betray them, which territories were contested, and which were locked down tight. She memorized faces, names, connections, the kind of information that could mean the difference between life and death. Luca watched this transformation with a mixture of pride and concern. He was healing well. The doctor had been right about it being a relatively minor wound, but Adriana caught him wincing when he moved too fast, saw the tight lines around his mouth that said he was in more pain than he admitted. "You should be resting," she told him one afternoon, finding him in his study going over shipping manifests. "I'm fine." "You're stubborn." She plucked the papers from his hands, ignored his glare. "And you're going to tear your stitches if you keep pushing yourself. There's too much to do. The Castellanos hit 3 of our operations while I was down. We need to respond, need to show strength. We will. But not at the cost of your health." She straddled his lap carefully, mindful of his injury, and cupped his face in her hands. "You have people to handle this, Luca. Trust them." "I trust them. I don't trust the Castellanos not to strike again while I'm weak." "Then don't be weak." She kissed him softly. "Be smart instead. Let them think you're down. Let them get confident, make mistakes, then hit them when they're not expecting it." His hand settled on her hips, holding her in place. "Marco's been teaching you strategy. Among other things, did you know the Castellanos have a warehouse on the south side that's barely guarded? Or that Antonio's nephew has a gambling problem that's made him vulnerable to pressure? Or that their money laundering operation runs through a car dealership that's one audit away from falling apart?" Luca's eyebrows rose. "You've been busy." "I told you I wanted to be your partner, not your trophy." She traced the line of his jaw, felt the muscles working beneath her fingers. "I meant it. This is dangerous, Adriana. If they find out you're gathering intelligence, they already want me dead. Might as well make it worth their while." She kissed him again, deeper this time. "Besides, I have advantages you don't. I'm new to this world. People underestimate me. They say things around me they'd never say around you. I don't like putting you at risk." "I'm already at risk. We established that when they shot up our home." She pulled back enough to meet his eyes. "Let me help, Luca. Let me be useful. I'm going insane sitting around this house playing the dutiful wife while you and Marco handle everything." He studied her for a long moment, conflict clear in his expression. Finally, "If you do this, you follow Marco's lead. No improvising, no taking unnecessary risks. You gather information and you get out. Understood?" "Understood." "And Adriana?" His grip on her hips tightened. "If anything happens to you because I let you get involved in this, I'll never forgive myself." Then make sure nothing happens to me. She grinned, felt something light and almost playful between them for the first time. You're supposed to be a legendary crime boss. Protecting one wife should be easy. You are anything but easy. But he was smiling too, a real smile that transformed his entire face. When did you get so fearless? I married the most dangerous man in Chicago. Fear felt redundant. He laughed, actually laughed, the sound warm and genuine. Then he kissed her, and talking became unnecessary for quite a while. Later, as they lay tangled together on the leather sofa in his study, Adriana's head on his chest, she felt something settle in her bones. This was what she'd been missing. Not just physical intimacy, but emotional connection. Being seen, being valued, being treated as an equal rather than a possession. I love you, she said quietly, testing the words in the space between them. Luca's hand stilled in her hair. She felt his heart rate spike beneath her ear. For a long moment he said nothing, and she wondered if she'd pushed too far, too fast. Then, I've loved you since the moment you walked down that aisle looking like a queen heading to her execution. So brave, so beautiful, so completely out of my reach even though you were walking straight to me. His voice was rough, choked with emotion he'd spent 3 months suppressing. I've loved you every day since, even when I was too much of a coward to show it. Even when I convinced myself distance was safer. I've loved you, Adriana. I just didn't know how to let you in. She tilted her head back to look at him, saw tears on his cheeks that he didn't bother to hide. And now? Now you're in so deep I can't imagine my life without you in it. He cupped her face, his thumb brushing away her own tears. Now I understand that trying to protect you by pushing you away was the stupidest thing I've ever done. Now I'm terrified every second that something will happen to you, but I'd rather be terrified and have you than safe and alone. Then we'll be terrified together. She kissed him, tasted salt and promise. And we'll win together, because the Castellanos made one critical mistake. What's that? They assumed you were the only dangerous one in this marriage. Her smile was all teeth. Time to teach them otherwise. The plan came together over the next 2 weeks. Marco provided intelligence, Luca coordinated their forces, and Adriana played the part she was born for, the beautiful, harmless wife who nobody took seriously. She attended charity luncheons and smiled at the women who'd gossiped about her marriage. She went to gallery openings and let Antonio Castellanos' associates buy her champagne while she extracted information with a sweet smile and careful questions. She played dumb, played fragile, played every stereotype of a mob wife, all while memorizing details, tracking movements, building a picture of the Castellanos' operations that would have made a detective proud. You're terrifyingly good at this, Marco told her after one particularly successful information-gathering session. If the boss ever decides to retire, you could run this organization. I'd rather run it with him. She reviewed her notes, cross-referencing them with the intelligence they'd already gathered. The car dealership is the weak point. If we can get the feds interested in their money laundering operation, it'll tie up their resources and give us room to move. Anonymous tip? Better. I know someone in the FBI. She pulled out her phone, scrolled through contacts. Went to school with his wife. They owe me a favor. Time to collect. Luca, listening to this exchange from his desk, shook his head in amazement. Where were you hiding all this time? In the wing you never visited, waiting for you to notice I was more than a pretty face and good breeding. She came around the desk, settled onto his lap. His injury had healed enough that he barely flinched anymore. You created this, you know. By trying to keep me ignorant and safe, you just gave me time to get creative. Remind me never to underestimate you again. I will, daily if necessary. She kissed him, savored the way he responded immediately, the way his hands found their familiar places on her body. Now, about the Castellanos' Southside warehouse. The strike came on a Wednesday night, 3 weeks after the attack on their home. Luca's forces hit 5 Castellano operations simultaneously: the warehouse, a gambling house, 2 shipping facilities, and Antonio's personal office. It was surgical, precise, overwhelming. By the time the sun rose, the Castellanos had lost millions in product. Their money laundering operation was under federal investigation, and half their leadership was either dead or in custody. Antonio himself survived. Luca wanted him alive, wanted him to understand exactly who had destroyed him. The message was delivered via Marco, who walked into Antonio's hospital room where he was recovering from 3 bullet wounds and laid it out clearly. Mrs. De Rossi says hello. and she wants you to know that every piece of intelligence we used to dismantle your organization came from her. That sweet, harmless little trophy wife you thought was Luca's weakness, she's the one who destroyed you. When Marco reported back, Adriana was in Luca's study, reviewing the final numbers. The Castellano family was effectively finished as a major player. Their territories were being absorbed, their assets seized, their reputation shattered. He took it well, Marco said with dark amusement, by which I mean he screamed for 10 minutes and threatened everyone in the room. Good. Adriana didn't look up from her laptop. Let him scream. Screaming is all he's got left. Luca came up behind her, wrapped his arms around her waist, pressed a kiss to her neck. Remind me never to make you angry. Too late. I'm still angry about the first 3 months of our marriage. Fair point. He turned her chair around, pulled her to her feet. How can I make it up to you? Well, there's this charity gala next week. I need a date. She looped her arms around his neck. Someone who actually wants to be seen with me, who looks at me like I'm more than a strategic acquisition, who loves me enough to let me be dangerous. I know someone who fits that description. He kissed her softly, thoroughly. He's madly in love with his wife. Can't imagine his life without her. Would burn the whole city down if anyone threatened her. Sounds perfect. You think he's available? For you? Always. They stood there in his study, wrapped around each other, the ruins of their enemies scattered around them and their future finally, terrifyingly, theirs to claim. It wasn't the marriage Adriana had walked into 3 months ago. It was better. Built on truth instead of lies, partnership instead of distance, love instead of duty. We make a good team, she said. We make a terrifying team. Luca's smile was wicked. The city should be very afraid. Let them be afraid. As long as they respect us, fear works just fine. He laughed and kissed her again, and Adriana thought about that scared girl in the marble hallway on her wedding day. The one who'd heard her future husband say he didn't want her. The one who'd walked down the aisle anyway, determined only to survive. She'd survived. But more than that, she'd conquered. She'd taken a marriage that was supposed to be a prison and turned it into a partnership. She'd taken a man who didn't want her and made him love her so completely he couldn't imagine life without her. The Castellanos had been right about one thing: she was Luca's weakness. But they'd failed to understand she was also his greatest strength. Together, they were unstoppable, and Chicago was theirs for the taking. The victory over the Castellanos should have brought peace. Instead, it brought something far more complicated. 6 months had passed since they'd dismantled Antonio's empire. 6 months of Adriana and Luca building something real from the ashes of their forced marriage. They'd moved into the same bedroom, shared meals, talked about everything from business strategy to childhood memories. The distance that had defined their first 3 months together had been replaced by an intimacy that still sometimes took Adriana's breath away. But peace in their world was always temporary. Adriana first felt it one morning in late spring, a wave of nausea so intense she barely made it to the bathroom before losing the previous night's dinner. Luca found her there, pale and shaking, and immediately called for the doctor. "I'm fine," she protested weakly. "Probably just something I ate." But the nausea continued. 3 days of waking up sick, of food tasting wrong, of exhaustion that sleep couldn't touch. The doctor arrived on the 4th day with a knowing smile and a simple test that changed everything. "Congratulations, Mrs. De Rossi, you're pregnant." The words hung in the air like smoke. Adriana stared at the doctor, then at Luca, whose face had gone completely blank. Pregnant. A baby. Their baby. "How far along?" Luca's voice was carefully controlled, giving nothing away. "About 6 weeks, I'd estimate. Still very early. We'll want to monitor closely, given the stress of your lifestyle." The doctor's tone was professional, but pointed. "Mrs. De Rossi will need to reduce physical activity, avoid stress, get plenty of rest." After the doctor left, they sat in silence in the bedroom they now shared. Luca hadn't moved from his position by the window, staring out at the grounds with that same blank expression. Adriana's hand drifted to her still flat stomach, trying to comprehend that there was a life growing inside her. A tiny person, half her and half Luca, completely dependent on them. "Say something," she finally whispered. He turned, and the look on his face made her chest tighten. Not anger, not disappointment, fear. Pure, raw terror. 6 weeks ago, you were in that car when the Marchetti family tried to run us off the road. 4 weeks ago, you were at that meeting when shots were fired. 2 weeks ago, you personally confronted a man with a gun to protect one of our operations. His voice was steady, but she could hear the tremor beneath it. You could have been hurt. The baby could have been, but we weren't. We're fine, both of us. She stood, crossed to him, took his hands. Luca, this is good news. We talked about wanting children someday. Someday when it was safe, when I'd built enough power that threats were minimal, when we weren't in the middle of consolidating territories and dealing with 3 families who want me dead. His hands tightened on hers almost painfully. How am I supposed to keep you safe now? How am I supposed to let you anywhere near my business when you're carrying our child? And there it was, the real fear. Not that he didn't want the baby, but that having it made them all vulnerable in ways he couldn't control. You're not going to lock me away like some porcelain doll, Adriana said firmly. I won't let you. I've fought too hard to be your partner to give that up now. You could lose the baby if something happens, and you could lose me if you start treating me like I'm fragile, if you push me away again. She pulled him closer, made him look at her. We're in this together, remember? That includes this. Yes, we'll be more careful. Yes, I'll reduce my involvement in direct operations. But I won't disappear. I won't go back to being that invisible wife waiting alone in an empty wing. The conflict played out across his face. The crime boss who'd built an empire on calculated risks versus the man who was terrified of losing what he loved most. Finally, he pulled her against him, buried his face in her hair. I can't lose you, either of you. It would destroy me. You won't. We're stronger than whatever comes at us. She tilted her head back, kissed him softly. But Luca, I need you to trust me. Trust that I know my limits. Trust that I won't put our baby at risk. Can you do that? It took him a long moment to answer. I can try. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest, and honesty was all they had. The news spread through their organization within hours. Impossible to keep secret when the doctor had been seen leaving, when Luca's entire demeanor had shifted. Marco was the first to offer congratulations, his usual stoic expression breaking into something almost paternal. About time, he said, clasping Luca's shoulder. The family needs an heir, solidifies your position. But that night, he pulled Adriana aside with a different message. He's going to be impossible now, Marco warned. Overprotective doesn't begin to cover it. He'll want you in a bunker surrounded by armed guards until the baby's born. I know, but I can handle him. Can you? Marco's eyes were sharp. Because the next few months are going to be critical. The other families are going to see your pregnancy as weakness. They're going to test us, push boundaries, see if Luca's distracted enough to make mistakes. We need you sharp, Mrs. De Rossi. We need that brilliant strategic mind. But Luca's going to fight you every step of the way. Then I'll fight back. She met his gaze steadily. I didn't become his partner just to quit when things get complicated. Marco studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Just be careful. For all our sakes. The first test came within a week. The Moretti family, her own blood relatives, requested a meeting. Her father had died 3 months earlier, leaving her cousin Vincent in charge of what remained of their operations. The request came through official channels, all proper protocol, but something about it set Adriana's instincts on edge. It's a trap, Luca said flatly when she showed him the message. They know about the pregnancy. They're going to try something. Or they genuinely want to negotiate new terms now that the power structure has shifted. Adriana studied the message again. Vincent's not stupid. He knows attacking us would be suicide. People do stupid things when they want power badly enough. Then let me talk to him. Feel out his intentions. We can meet on neutral ground somewhere public with security. She saw Luca's jaw tighten, his automatic refusal forming. I can do this, Luca. Vincent knows me. He might tell me things he'd never tell you. Absolutely not. You're not going anywhere near the Morettis. You don't get to make that decision for me. She kept her voice level, but steel ran through it. I'm your partner, not your prisoner. If you want my strategic input, you have to let me use it. They stared at each other, wills clashing. Finally, Luca ran a hand through his hair, frustration radiating off him. Fine, but Marco goes with you, and 20 of our best men, and you wear body armor, and you stay in public spaces at all times, and if anything feels wrong, you leave immediately. Agreed. She kissed his cheek. See? We can compromise. This isn't compromise. This is me slowly losing my mind while you do dangerous things. Welcome to marriage. The meeting was set for a restaurant in downtown Chicago. Expensive, public, the kind of place where violence would bring immediate police attention. Adriana dressed carefully in a loose silk blouse that hid her still flat stomach and the Kevlar vest beneath it. Marco and his men were positioned throughout the restaurant, watching every entrance, every exit, every face. Vincent Moretti arrived precisely on time, flanked by his own security. He was younger than Luca, maybe 28, with the kind of polished good looks that came from expensive grooming and confidence. He'd always been charming, even as a child, but there was something harder in him now. Something that suggested her father's death hadn't been the tragedy Vincent portrayed it as. "Cousin," he kissed both her cheeks in the traditional greeting. "You look radiant. Marriage agrees with you." "Thank you, Vincent. Please sit." She gestured to the chair across from her, hyper-aware of Marco's position at a nearby table, of the weight of the vest against her ribs. "What did you want to discuss?" Vincent ordered wine, expensive, red, and took his time with the pleasantries. How was she finding married life? Was the estate comfortable? Had she heard from various relatives? The entire time, his eyes cataloged everything, looking for weaknesses, for leverage. Finally, he leaned back in his chair and got to the point. "My father made a deal with your husband. Territories, operations, loyalty, all handed over as your dowry. It was generous, perhaps too generous." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "I want to renegotiate. The deal was made between our fathers and Luca. I'm not sure I have any say in—" "Don't play naive, Adriana. Everyone knows you're far more than the decorative wife. Word is you personally orchestrated the Castellanos' downfall, that you have Luca's ear on all major decisions." He leaned forward. "I'm offering you a chance to help your blood family. The Morettis have been weak since your father's death. We need support, resources, a stronger position in the city's hierarchy. You could arrange that." "In exchange for what?" "Information, access, your loyalty when it matters." His voice dropped lower. "Your father sold you like cattle, Adriana. Handed you to Luca de Rossi like you were property. Don't you want revenge for that? Don't you want to hurt the man who treated you like a commodity?" Adriana's stomach turned, but she kept her expression neutral. "You're asking me to betray my husband. I'm asking you to remember where you came from. You're a Moretti first, a de Rossi second. Blood matters more than marriage vows." She took a sip of water, buying time to think. This was exactly what Marco had warned about. Someone trying to exploit her pregnancy, her family ties, any perceived crack in her loyalty to Luca. Vincent thought he was clever, thought he could manipulate her resentment about the arranged marriage into betrayal. He didn't know that she'd already worked through that resentment, that she'd chosen Luca, chosen their life together, chosen to build something real from what had started as a transaction. "You're right," she said slowly. "My father did sell me. He handed me to Luca like I was a piece in a business deal. It was degrading, humiliating, every bit as terrible as you're suggesting." Vincent's smile widened, sensing victory. "But here's what you don't understand, Vincent. Luca didn't keep treating me that way. He gave me power, gave me respect, gave me a partnership. He sees me as an equal, trusts my judgment, values my input. Can you say the same about the women in your life? About any of the Moretti women?" The smile faltered. "You come here thinking you can exploit some imagined rift between me and my husband, thinking I'm bitter enough about my past to destroy my future. But you're wrong. I'm not a Moretti anymore, Vincent. I'm a de Rossi. And de Rossis don't betray family." "Your loyalty is touching," Vincent said, his voice hardening. "And stupid. You think Luca loves you? You think this partnership is real? You're a womb, Adriana, an incubator for his heir. The moment you give him a son, you'll become as disposable as any other wife." Adriana stood, the conversation clearly over. "I think we're done here." "Sit down. We're not finished." "Yes, we are." She signaled to Marco, who was already moving toward them. "You made your offer. I declined. There's nothing more to discuss." Vincent's hand shot out, gripped her wrist hard enough to hurt. "You're making a mistake. The Morettis have long memories, cousin. Cross us now and—" He didn't finish the sentence. Marco's gun was suddenly pressed against Vincent's temple, cold and steady. "Release her," Marco said quietly. "Now." Vincent let go immediately, hands raised, but his eyes burned with fury. "This isn't over." "It is." Adriana rubbed her wrist where his fingers had left red marks. "Tell the Morettis that if they want to negotiate with the de Rossis, they do it through proper channels. Not through me, not through threats, and definitely not by insulting my marriage." She walked out of the restaurant with her head high, Marco and his men forming a protective wall around her. Only when they were in the car, speeding away from downtown, did she allow herself to shake. "You did good in there," Marco said. "Most people would have cracked under that kind of pressure." "I wanted to break his hand." Her voice trembled despite her best efforts. "The way he talked about Luca, about our marriage, he was trying to get a rise out of you. Classic manipulation. You didn't fall for it." "No, but now we have a problem. Vincent's not going to let this go. He'll see my refusal as a declaration of war. Then we'll be ready for war." Marco's expression was grim. "The boss needs to know about this immediately." Luca's reaction was exactly what Adriana expected, fury followed by an immediate demand that she never leave the estate again. They argued in his study, voices rising, months of carefully built trust suddenly tested by fear. "He grabbed you, Adriana, put his hands on you while you're carrying our child." "And Marco handled it. Nothing happened. This is exactly why I went, to handle situations like this without it escalating to violence." "It did escalate to violence. Marco had a gun to his head. But he didn't pull the trigger because I controlled the situation." She slammed her hands on his desk, making him flinch. "I did exactly what we agreed on. I assessed the threat, gathered intelligence, extracted myself safely. This is what partnership looks like, Luca. You have to trust me to do my job. Your job is to stay alive and keep our babies safe. My job is to be your partner, to use my skills and connections to strengthen our position. Vincent came to me because he thought I was weak, thought pregnancy would make me vulnerable. I proved him wrong. I showed him that Derossi women are not to be underestimated. That's valuable, Luca. That sends a message." He paced the study like a caged animal, torn between professional appreciation for her strategy and personal terror at the risks she'd taken. Finally, he stopped in front of her, hands gripping her shoulders. "I can't do this," he said hoarsely. "I can't send you into danger and wait to find out if you're coming home. It's killing me, Adriana. Every time you walk out that door, I imagine the worst. I imagine losing you, losing our baby, losing everything that matters. I can't breathe until you're back safe." Her anger deflated, replaced by understanding. This wasn't about controlling her. It was about loving her so much it terrified him. "Then we need new protocols," she said gently. "Better security, more backup, clear boundaries about what kinds of situations I handle personally versus through intermediates. But Luca, you can't lock me away. It won't keep me safe. It'll just make me a sitting target." I know you're right. He pulled her against him, careful of the vest she still wore. "I love you so much it scares me. And now there's a baby, and the fear has doubled. I don't know how to function like this." "Well, you function by trusting that I'm smart and careful and surrounded by people who will die before they let anything happen to me." She pulled back enough to look at him. "You function by remembering that we're stronger together than apart. And you function by understanding that the greatest danger to our family isn't external threats. It's us turning on each other out of fear." He kissed her then, deep and desperate, pouring all his fear and love and helplessness into it. When they finally broke apart, something had settled between them. "New protocols," he agreed, but better security. "And you promise, you swear, that you'll err on the side of caution, that if something feels wrong, you get out immediately." "I promise." "And no more surprise meetings with hostile family members." "That I can't promise. This is our world, Luca. Hostile family members are kind of our specialty." Despite everything, he laughed. "You're going to be the death of me. Probably. But at least you'll die knowing you were loved." The Moretti situation escalated over the next 2 months, exactly as Adriana had predicted. Vincent made his move carefully, trying to peel away some of the territories her father had given Luca, attempting to forge alliances with families who resented the Derossi expansion. It was subtle, strategic, and exactly the kind of slow-building threat that required careful management. Adriana worked with Marco to counter each move, using her knowledge of the Moretti family's weak points to anticipate Vincent's strategies. Meanwhile, her pregnancy became increasingly visible, her body changing in ways that felt both miraculous and terrifying. Luca became even more protective, if that was possible, but he kept his word about not locking her away. Then, 6 months into the pregnancy, everything changed. Adriana was in her office. She'd taken over a room on the main floor for her work coordinating their various operations, when Marco burst in without knocking, his face ashen. "We have a problem, a big one." She looked up from her laptop. How big? Vincent has Luca. The world tilted. What? They grabbed him an hour ago, ambushed his car on the way back from a meeting, killed 3 of our men, took the boss alive. Marco's jaw was tight with barely controlled fury. They're demanding ransom, money, territories, complete surrender of everything your father gave us, and they want you to deliver it personally. Adriana's hand went to her swollen stomach, the baby kicking as if sensing her distress. This is about me. Vincent's trying to prove I made the wrong choice. Probably. But right now we need to focus on getting the boss back alive. Have they made contact? Sent proof of life? Marco handed her his phone. A video was queued up. Luca bound to a chair, blood on his face, but alive. Conscious. Angry. You have 24 hours. Vincent's voice came from off-screen. Adriana delivers the terms personally, or we start sending pieces of her husband back to the estate. Your choice, cousin. The video cut off. Adriana watched it again, studying every detail. Luca's injuries looked superficial, bloody, but not life-threatening. The room was generic, could be anywhere. But there was something in Luca's eyes, the way he kept glancing to his left, that suggested he was trying to communicate something. They're going to kill him regardless, Marco said quietly, even if we meet their demands. They can't let him go after this. It would make them look weak. I know. Adriana's mind was racing, sifting through options, calculating odds. Which means we're not meeting their demands. We're getting him out. With all due respect, Mrs. De Rossi, you're 6 months pregnant. You can't be part of a rescue operation. I'm not going to be. But I am going to give Vincent exactly what he wants. Me. Delivered personally. She met Marco's eyes. I'm going to walk in there and buy you time to get Luca out. Absolutely not. The boss isn't here to make decisions. I am. Her voice hardened into something that reminded Marco uncomfortably of Luca at his most dangerous. Vincent wants me? Fine. I'll give him a chance to gloat, to feel like he's won. And while he's distracted enjoying his victory, you and your men will breach whatever location they're holding Luca in and extract him. And if something goes wrong, if they hurt you, if they hurt the baby, then you make Vincent Moretti regret the day he was born. She pulled up a map on her computer. Now, let's figure out where they're holding him. That room in the video had specific acoustics, certain background noises. We can narrow it down. They worked through the night, Adriana refusing to rest despite Marco's protests and her own exhaustion. By dawn, they'd identified 3 likely locations, all Moretti properties, all heavily guarded. The plan was risky, dependent on timing and luck, but it was the best chance they had. I should go with the assault team, Adriana said as they finalized the strategy. No, Marco was absolute. You go nowhere near the actual rescue. You make contact with Vincent, keep him occupied, and stay the hell away from gunfire. Those are my terms. Since when do you get to set terms with me? Since the boss made me promise that if anything ever happened to him, I'd protect you with my life. I intend to keep that promise. Marco's expression softened fractionally. Besides, that baby needs at least one parent to survive this mess. Adriana's hand went to her stomach again, feeling the solid weight of the life growing inside her. Marco was right. She couldn't risk both herself and Luca. One of them needed to survive for their child. All right, but if this goes wrong, if Vincent tries anything, then I'll burn the entire Moretti family to the ground and scatter the ashes. The meeting was set for noon at an abandoned warehouse in the industrial district. Classic mob drama, Adriana thought with dark humor as she approached in an armored SUV surrounded by security. Vincent wanted theater, wanted to make a show of defeating the great Luca De Rossi by breaking his wife. He was going to be disappointed. She walked into the warehouse alone, as Vincent had demanded, though she knew Marco's snipers had every exit covered and assault teams were positioned blocks away, waiting for her signal. The space was cavernous, echoing, filled with shadows and the smell of rust. Vincent stood in the center, flanked by a dozen armed men, looking every inch the conquering hero. His smile when he saw her was triumphant. Adriana, you came. You have my husband. Of course I came. She kept her voice steady, her hands visible, non-threatening. Where is he? Safe. For now. Vincent circled her slowly, predatory. You've gotten fat, cousin. Pregnancy doesn't suit you. Jealousy doesn't suit you, Vincent. But here we are. His expression darkened. Did you bring the terms? I brought a counteroffer. She pulled a thumb drive from her pocket. Everything you asked for: territory transfers, financial accounts, operational access, all digitally signed and ready to execute in exchange for Luca's safe return. That wasn't the deal. The deal was unconditional surrender. The deal was getting what you want. This gets you everything and more. Take it, Vincent. Walk away rich and powerful. Or refuse and watch your entire family burn for kidnapping Luca de Rossi. He snatched the drive from her hand, motioned to one of his men to verify its contents. While they worked, Adriana counted seconds in her head. Marco needed 10 minutes to get into position. She'd been here for 3. This isn't about money or territory, Vincent said quietly, moving close enough that she could smell the expensive cologne he wore. This is about respect. About showing the world that the Morettis are not to be dismissed, that we don't let insults go unanswered. What insult? I declined your offer. That's not an insult, it's a business decision. You chose him over family. You chose your husband over your blood. His hand shot out, gripped her jaw hard. That's unforgivable. Adriana didn't flinch. You think blood makes family? You think sharing DNA obligates me to support your petty power plays? She jerked her chin free. Luca gave me more respect in 6 months than the Morettis gave me in 22 years. That's why I chose him. Not because he's my husband, because he's my partner. How touching. Vincent's smile was cruel. Too bad you'll never see him again. Warning bells screamed in Adriana's mind. What? Did you really think I'd let him live? Did you think I'd pass up this opportunity? He gestured to his men. Luca de Rossi dies today, and you're going to watch. 7 minutes. Marco needed 3 more minutes. You kill him, and you start a war you can't win, Adriana said, stalling. Every family in Chicago will come after you. The de Rossi organization will never stop hunting you. Let them try. By the time they mobilize, I'll have consolidated power. I'll have their territories, their operations, their money. And I'll have you, the grieving widow, forced to marry her cousin to unite the families. It's poetic, really. Bile rose in Adriana's throat. You're insane. I'm ambitious. There's a difference. He nodded to one of his men who pulled out a phone and dialed. Bring him in. The warehouse's side door opened. 2 of Vincent's men dragged in a bound figure, threw him to the concrete floor. Luca, bloodied and beaten, but alive. His eyes found Adriana immediately, blazing with fury and fear. Adriana, get out of here! One of Vincent's men hit him, silencing him. Adriana took a step forward, every instinct screaming to run to him, but Vincent grabbed her arm. You stay right here. You watch this. 9 minutes. 1 more minute. Vincent, please. I'll do whatever you want. Just don't hurt him. Now you beg? Now you show proper deference? He laughed. Too late, cousin. This is happening. He pulled out a gun, aimed it at Luca's head. Adriana's world narrowed to that moment. The man she loved on his knees, the father of her child about to die, her future shattering before her eyes. She didn't think, didn't plan. She just moved. Her hand went to the small of her back, to the compact pistol Marco had insisted she carry despite her protests. She pulled it in one smooth motion, years of training at her father's insistence finally paying off. The shot echoed through the warehouse like thunder. Vincent's gun clattered to the floor, his hand bleeding where Adriana's bullet had torn through it. For a second, everyone froze in shock. Then chaos erupted. Adriana dove for cover as Vincent's men opened fire. Luca, still bound, threw himself behind a concrete pillar. The warehouse exploded with sound, gunshots, shouting, breaking glass as Marco's snipers took out targets through the high windows. The assault team breached through 3 entrances simultaneously, Marco leading the charge with deadly precision. Vincent's men were outgunned, outmaneuvered, caught completely off guard by the coordinated attack. It was over in 90 seconds. Adriana huddled behind a metal crate, her hands over her stomach, praying the baby was okay, praying Luca was alive. When the shooting stopped, when the ringing in her ears faded enough to hear, she lifted her head carefully. Bodies everywhere. Vincent's men, mostly, cut down by Marco's team. A few of their own security personnel injured but alive, and there, being cut free from his bonds by Marco himself, was Luca. He was on his feet immediately, scanning the warehouse with wild eyes until he found her. Then he was running, limping, but moving fast, pulling her into his arms with bruising force. Are you hurt? Is the baby? We're okay. We're both okay. She was crying, shaking, but whole. Are you? I'm fine. I'm fine now." He kissed her frantically, her face, her hair, her lips, as if reassuring himself she was real. "You shot him. You actually shot Vincent. He was going to kill you. I wasn't going to let that happen. You could have been hurt. You could have lost the baby. You could have—" His voice broke. "You should have stayed away. Should have let Marco handle this." "And let Vincent kill you? Not a chance." She pulled back enough to look at him. His face was a mess of bruises and cuts, but his eyes were clear. Alive. "We're partners, remember? That means I have your back. Always." Marco approached, Vincent's bleeding form being dragged behind him. The Moretti heir was conscious, but clearly in shock, staring at Adriana like he couldn't believe what had happened. "What do you want me to do with him?" Marco asked. Luca looked at Adriana, deferring to her. It was her family. Her call. She studied Vincent coldly, this man who'd thought she was weak, who'd tried to use her pregnancy against her, who'd been seconds away from murdering her husband. "Make it clean," she said quietly. "No torture. Just end it. The Moretti family is finished. Absorb their territories, take care of their people. But Vincent doesn't get to walk away from this." Vincent's eyes widened. "Adriana, please, we're family." "No. We were family. You gave that up when you threatened my husband and child." She turned away, unable to watch, but knowing it had to be done. "Goodbye, Vincent." The single gunshot was almost anticlimactic after everything else. Adriana didn't flinch, didn't cry, didn't feel anything but cold certainty that she'd made the right call. Luca wrapped his arm around her, guided her toward the exit. "Let's go home." The drive back to the estate was silent, both of them too wrung out for words. Adriana's hands wouldn't stop shaking, adrenaline and fear catching up with her now that the immediate danger had passed. Luca held one of her hands the entire way, his grip gentle despite the violence they'd just survived. When they finally made it inside, when the doors were locked and security was tripled and the doctor had been called to check on both of them, they collapsed together on their bed. "I could have lost you today," Luca whispered into the darkness. "Both of you." "But you didn't. We survived. We won." "At what cost?" He turned to face her, his eyes haunted. "You had to kill your own cousin. You had to make that choice because I got captured like an amateur, because I failed to protect you." "Stop!" She cupped his battered face in her hands. "You didn't fail. Vincent was smart, used tactics we didn't anticipate. But we adapted. We survived. And yes, I had to make a horrible choice, but I'd make it again in a heartbeat to save you. I don't want you to have to make choices like that. I don't want you in situations where killing family members is the only option." "Then you married the wrong woman." Her voice was gentle but firm. "I'm not fragile, Luca. I'm not innocent. I was raised in this world, trained for it, built for it. Today wasn't the first time I've had to do something terrible, and it won't be the last. But I did it to protect us, to protect our family, and I won't apologize for that." He kissed her then, tasting salt and blood and survival. "I love you. Even when I'm terrified for you, even when I want to lock you in a tower, I love you." "I love you too, tower and all." They lay together in the darkness, broken and victorious, holding on to each other like lifelines. Outside, their empire continued its work. Marco coordinating the absorption of Moretti territories, security ensuring no other threats could reach them, the machinery of power grinding forward. But in this moment, in this bed, they were just Luca and Adriana, husband and wife. Partners who'd faced death and chosen each other, again and again, no matter the cost. The baby kicked, a solid thump against Adriana's ribs. Luca's hand went immediately to her stomach, his expression transforming from haunted to wondering. "Strong," he murmured, "like her mother. Or him. Doesn't matter. Either way, this kid's going to be unstoppable." He pressed a kiss to her belly, and completely terrifying. Adriana laughed despite everything, the sound surprising them both. "Fair warning, if our daughter inherits my stubbornness and your strategic mind, Chicago doesn't stand a chance. Chicago's already doomed. We've seen to that." They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other and their unborn child, survivors of a war that had tested everything they'd built. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new threats, new battles to fight. But tonight, they had each other. And that, Adriana thought, as sleep finally claimed her, was more than enough. Winter arrived early that year, blanketing Chicago in snow that made the world look clean and new. 3 months had passed since the confrontation with Vincent. 3 months of relative peace that felt almost surreal after the chaos that had defined their first year of marriage. The Moretti territories had been absorbed smoothly, their remaining family members either swearing loyalty to the de Rossis or quietly relocating to other cities. Marco had handled it all with his usual efficiency, and the other families had taken note. Attacking the de Rossis came with consequences too severe to contemplate. But peace in their world was always fragile, and Adriana knew better than to trust it completely. She was 9 months pregnant now, enormous and uncomfortable and counting the days until she could meet the tiny person who'd been using her ribs as a punching bag. The nursery was ready, decorated in soft creams and golds, state-of-the-art security, every possible precaution taken. Luca had become even more impossibly protective, barely letting her out of his sight, insisting she rest constantly despite her protests that she was pregnant, not dying. "You need to sit down," he said for the 100th time that morning, finding her in her office reviewing shipping manifests. "I need to finish this analysis before the meeting with the Harbor Commission." Marco can handle it." Marco has his hands full with the expansion into the south side. "I'm handling the harbor." She didn't look up from her laptop, knowing if she did, she'd see that expression on his face, the one that was half concern, half pure terror that something would happen to her or the baby. "Adriana, Luca, I love you. But if you tell me to sit down one more time, I'm going to throw this laptop at your head." She finally met his eyes, softening the threat with a smile. "I'm fine. The baby's fine. I have 3 weeks until my due date. I can still work." He crossed to her, knelt beside her chair, placed his hands on her swollen belly. The baby kicked immediately, and his expression transformed into that wondering smile he got whenever he felt movement. "I know you're fine. I know you're the strongest person I've ever met. But humor me anyway?" He kissed her stomach, then looked up at her with those dark eyes that still made her heart skip. "Let Marco handle the Harbor Commission. Spend the day resting. Please?" It was the please that got her. Luca de Rossi didn't say please often, and when he did, it meant he was genuinely worried. "All right, but only because you asked nicely." She saved her work and closed the laptop. "What did you have in mind for this rest day?" "Actually sitting down, for starters. Maybe reading one of those pregnancy books the doctor gave you. Eating something other than the coffee and dry toast you had for breakfast." His hand traced gentle circles on her belly. "Maybe letting me take care of you for once instead of trying to run the entire organization while 9 months pregnant. Where's the fun in that?" "The fun is in not going into premature labor because you're too stubborn to slow down." He had a point, much as she hated to admit it. The past few weeks had been exhausting, her body demanding rest while her mind insisted there was too much work to do. She'd been pushing herself too hard, and they both knew it. "Fine, you win. I'll rest today." She let him help her to her feet. No easy task given her current size. "But tomorrow, I'm back to work. We have the meeting with the Salvatores, and I need to be there for that." "We'll see. Luca, we'll see how you're feeling tomorrow. One day at a time, tesoro." She wanted to argue, but a sudden sharp pain low in her abdomen made her gasp instead. Luca's hands were on her immediately, steadying her. "What's wrong? Is it the baby?" "Just Braxton Hicks. The doctor said they're normal." But even as she said it, another contraction rippled through her, stronger this time. "Or maybe not Braxton Hicks." Luca's face went white. "You're in labor." "I don't know. It could just be false labor. The doctor said—" Another contraction cut her off, this one strong enough to double her over. "Okay, maybe actual labor." The estate exploded into controlled chaos. Maria appeared with a pre-packed hospital bag. Marco coordinated security for the trip. The doctor was called and promised to meet them at the hospital. Luca transformed from overprotective husband into efficient crime boss, barking orders while never letting go of Adriana's hand. "This is too early," he kept saying as they helped her into the armored SUV. "You have 3 more weeks. The baby's not supposed to come yet." "Babies don't follow schedules." Another contraction seized her, and she gripped his hand hard enough to make him wince. "Apparently ours is impatient. Wonder where they get that from." Despite everything, despite the pain and the fear and the uncertainty, Luca laughed. "Definitely from you." The drive to Northwestern Memorial felt like it took hours, though it was probably only 20 minutes. Contractions came in waves, each one stronger than the last, each one reminding Adriana that there was no going back from this. In a matter of hours, she'd be a mother. They'd be parents. Their child would be born into this dangerous, complicated world they'd built together. The hospital had been notified in advance. one of the benefits of being married to Chicago's most powerful crime boss. They had an entire private floor reserved, security posted at every entrance, doctors and nurses handpicked for their discretion and skill. Adriana was whisked into a delivery room while Luca paced outside, arguing with the staff about being allowed in. "Sir, we need to prep her first. That's my wife. That's my child. I'm not waiting out here like some stranger." "Mr. DeRossi, please. He can come in." Adriana's voice cut through the argument, weaker than she'd like, but firm enough. "I want him here." So Luca was there for all of it. The monitors and the examinations, and the increasingly painful contractions. He held her hand, wiped her forehead, whispered encouragement even when she cursed him for getting her pregnant in the first place. Hours blurred together, time marked only by the steadily increasing intensity of her labor. "You're doing beautifully," the doctor said during one examination. "Almost there. Just a little longer." "That's what you said 2 hours ago," Adriana ground out through clenched teeth. "I know, but this time I mean it. You're fully dilated. Next contraction, I want you to push." Fear and anticipation warred in her chest. This was it. After 9 months of waiting, of wondering, of building their life around this tiny unknown person, they were about to meet their child. Luca's hand found hers, squeezed gently. "You can do this. You're the strongest person I know. If you ever want to have sex again, you're getting a vasectomy." He laughed despite the tension. "Deal." The next contraction hit, and Adriana pushed with everything she had. The pain was enormous, all-consuming, but underneath it was a fierce determination. She'd survived Vincent's attack, survived the violence and chaos of their world, survived transforming from unwanted bride to powerful partner. She could survive this too. Minutes or hours later, she'd lost all sense of time. A new sound filled the room, a cry, high and indignant, furiously alive. "It's a girl!" the doctor announced, lifting a tiny, perfect, screaming infant. "Congratulations!" Adriana's vision blurred with tears as they placed her daughter on her chest. She was so small, so impossibly fragile, with a shock of dark hair and Luca's eyes, and the most beautiful, angry expression Adriana had ever seen. "Hi, baby girl," she whispered, her voice breaking. "We've been waiting for you." Luca was crying too, this dangerous man who ruled Chicago's underworld, reduced to tears by the sight of his newborn daughter. He touched her tiny hand with one finger, and she gripped it immediately, her whole fist wrapping around his finger. "She's perfect," he said hoarsely. "You're both perfect." The doctor and nurses bustled around them, but Adriana barely noticed. Her entire world had narrowed to this moment, her husband beside her, her daughter in her arms, the family they'd fought so hard to build finally complete. "What should we name her?" Luca asked. They'd discussed names for months, but never settled on anything definitive. Looking at her daughter now, feeling the solid weight of her, Adriana knew exactly what her name should be. "Elena, like your mother." She looked at Luca, saw understanding and gratitude wash over his face. "Elena Sofia DeRossi. It's perfect." He kissed Adriana's forehead, then pressed the gentlest kiss to Elena's tiny head. "Welcome to the family, little one. We're going to keep you safe, always." The first few days passed in a blur of feedings and diaper changes and visitors carefully vetted by Marco's security team. Elena was a good baby, alert and curious, with a temper that showed itself whenever she was hungry or uncomfortable. She had Luca wrapped around her tiny finger within hours, this man who commanded absolute obedience from dangerous criminals rendered completely helpless by a 7-pound infant. "I can't believe how small she is," he said one night, holding Elena while Adriana tried to get some sleep. "How does something this small even exist?" "Very carefully," Adriana murmured, too exhausted to fully open her eyes. "And loudly, when she wants food." As if on cue, Elena began to fuss. Luca tried to soothe her, but she was having none of it. With a sigh, Adriana sat up and reached for her daughter. "She's hungry, again. Apparently she inherited your appetite." "My appetite is perfectly normal. You eat like you're feeding a small army. I'm a growing boy." Despite her exhaustion, Adriana laughed. This was their life now, sleepless nights and baby spit-up and ridiculous conversations at 3 in the morning. It was messy and chaotic, and nothing like the cold, distant marriage she'd walked into 15 months ago. It was perfect. The real test came 2 weeks later when they brought Elena home to the estate. Marco had tripled security, installed new cameras, vetted every single staff member again. The nursery had been swept for bugs and threats. Nothing was being left to chance. But danger, when it came, arrived from an unexpected direction. Adriana was alone in the nursery, rocking a fussy Elena, when her phone buzzed with an alert from the security system. Someone had breached the perimeter. Multiple someones, judging by the number of alarms going off. Her blood turned to ice. She hit the panic button hidden in the nursery wall and grabbed Elena, holding her close as she moved toward the safe room. But before she could reach the hidden door, it opened from the inside. Marco emerged, his face grim but relieved. "Thank heaven, we need to get you both to safety. The Salvatores are making a move." The Salvatores? Adriana's mind raced. They'd been scheduled to meet with that family next week to discuss territory agreements. Why would they attack now? "I thought we had a truce." "Apparently not. They've hit 3 of our operations simultaneously, and now they're coming for the estate. We need to move. Now." Adriana followed him into the safe room, Elena crying in her arms, her heart pounding. This was exactly what she'd feared, bringing a child into their violent world, giving their enemies a target that couldn't defend itself. The safe room door sealed behind them. Marco was already on his phone, coordinating the defense, calling in reinforcements. Through the thick walls, Adriana could hear muffled sounds, gunfire, shouting, breaking glass. "Where's Luca?" she demanded. "Leading the defense." "He's fine, Mrs. De Rossi. The boss can handle himself." But Adriana wasn't so sure. The Salvatores were one of Chicago's oldest families, powerful and ruthless. If they'd planned this attack carefully, if they'd found weaknesses in the estate's defenses, Luca could be in real danger. She pulled out her phone, tried to call him. No answer. Tried again. Nothing. Elena's cries intensified, feeding off Adriana's fear. She forced herself to breathe, to calm down, to be the mother her daughter needed even while her husband was fighting for their lives upstairs. "Marco, I need you to be honest with me. How bad is this?" He met her eyes, and she saw the truth there before he spoke. "Bad. They came prepared. Military-grade weapons, trained fighters. This isn't a skirmish. This is war." "Then we need to end it." Adriana's voice hardened, the strategic mind that had helped destroy the Castellanos and the Morettis kicking into gear despite her fear. "The Salvatores are attacking because they think the baby makes us weak. They think we're vulnerable. We need to prove them wrong. With all due respect, you just gave birth 2 weeks ago. You're not in any condition. I'm in perfect condition to protect my family." She secured Elena in the carrier she'd brought with her, the baby's cries finally starting to quiet. "What are our options?" Marco studied her for a long moment, then seemed to come to a decision. He pulled up a map on his tablet, showing the estate layout and the Salvatore's positions. "They're focusing their attack on the east wing, probably trying to draw our forces away from this area. Standard divide and conquer tactics. But it means their rear flank is exposed. If we could hit them from behind while they're engaged with our main security force, we could trap them, pin them between 2 defensive positions." Adriana studied the map, her mind calculating angles and timing. "Do we have forces that can mobilize to that position?" "Some, but it would take coordination, perfect timing. If we mess this up, we could lose people. If we do nothing, we lose anyway. The Salvatores won't stop with this attack. They'll keep coming until we're destroyed." She looked at Elena, sleeping now despite the chaos around them, so small and innocent and completely dependent on them for protection. "Make the call, Marco. Coordinate the counterattack. I'll stay here with Elena where it's safe, but you get our people in position and you end this. Permanently. The boss is going to kill me for taking orders from you. The boss married me knowing exactly what he was getting. Now go." Marco left the safe room, already barking orders into his phone. Adriana was alone with her daughter, surrounded by concrete and steel, listening to the sounds of battle rage above them. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to grab Elena and disappear, to prioritize their safety above everything else. But running would only postpone the inevitable. Their enemies would always find them. The only way to truly protect Elena was to ensure those enemies didn't survive long enough to pose a threat. So Adriana waited, her phone clutched in one hand, monitoring the security feeds that showed the battle unfolding. She watched Marco's forces execute her strategy, watched them close the trap on the Salvatore attackers, watched the tide of battle turn in their favor. And she waited for Luca to answer his phone. It took 45 minutes for the attack to be fully repelled. 45 minutes of Adriana's heart in her throat, Elena sleeping peacefully against her chest, completely unaware of the violence being committed to keep her safe. When the all-clear finally came, when Marco returned to the safe room with blood on his shirt, but a grim smile on his face, Adriana nearly collapsed with relief. It's over. The Salvatores are finished. Most of their attack force is dead, the rest scattered. We took their leadership alive. They're in the basement waiting for the boss to deal with them. And Luca, is he? I'm here. Luca's voice came from behind Marco, and then he was there, battered and bloodied but alive. His eyes went immediately to Adriana and Elena, scanning them for injuries. You're both okay? We're fine. Safe. She stood on shaky legs, closed the distance between them. You're hurt. Flesh wounds, nothing serious, but there was something in his eyes, something dark and dangerous. They came into our home, Adriana. They attacked while our daughter was here, while you were vulnerable. But we survived. We won. Because you helped Marco coordinate the counterattack. He cupped her face in his bloody hands. I heard the recordings. You strategized this victory from a safe room with a newborn baby. You're incredible, and I'm furious with you for not just hiding like I wanted you to. I did hide. I just hid productively. She leaned into his touch, relief and adrenaline making her dizzy. What are we going to do with the Salvatores? His expression hardened into something she recognized, the crime boss who ruled through fear and absolute authority. I'm going to send a message, one that every family in Chicago will understand. Attacking the DeRossis comes with consequences that make death look merciful. Luca, no. His voice was steel. No mercy. Not for this. They knew you'd just given birth. They knew Elena was here. They attacked anyway. They wanted to kill our daughter, Adriana. They forfeit any claim to mercy when they did that. She wanted to argue, wanted to pull him back from the edge she could see him approaching. But he was right. The Salvatores had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Their daughter's safety required absolute, undeniable proof that threatening her would result in annihilation. Make it quick, she said quietly. We don't torture. We're not monsters. We're exactly monsters enough to protect our family, but his expression softened fractionally. Quick, I promise. He kissed her forehead, pressed a gentle kiss to Elena's head, then turned and left the safe room with Marco. Adriana didn't follow. She didn't need to see what happened next. She knew Luca would handle it with the brutal efficiency that had made him Chicago's most feared crime boss. Instead, she took her daughter and went to the nursery, now under triple guard, every window reinforced, every entrance monitored. She changed Elena's diaper, fed her, rocked her while singing a lullaby her own mother had sung to her as a child. This was their world now. Beauty and violence, love and brutality, moments of perfect peace interrupted by battles for survival. Elena would grow up knowing both sides of that coin, raised by parents who would kill without hesitation to keep her safe, but who also loved her with a fierceness that bordered on madness. When Luca finally returned hours later, he was clean, changed, the blood washed away, but the weight of what he'd done still visible in his eyes. He found them in the nursery, Adriana in the rocking chair with Elena asleep in her arms. It's done, he said quietly. The Salvatores won't trouble us again. No one will. What did you do? What needed to be done? He sat on the floor at her feet, his head resting against her knee. I made it clear that anyone who threatens our family won't just die. Everyone they love will die. Everything they've built will be destroyed. Their name will be erased from Chicago's history. That's harsh, even for you. They tried to kill our daughter, Adriana. Harsh doesn't begin to cover what they deserved. He looked up at her, and she saw the toll the day had taken in the lines around his eyes. I won't apologize for protecting my family. Not ever. I'm not asking you to. She stroked his hair gently, careful not to wake Elena. I'm just making sure you're okay, that doing what you had to do didn't cost you too much. The only thing that would cost me too much is losing you or Elena. Everything else is just business. He reached up, touched Elena's tiny hand. She slept through all of it? Babies are resilient. She has no idea her father just waged war to keep her safe. Someday she'll know. Someday we'll have to tell her what kind of world she was born into, what kind of people we are. His voice cracked slightly. I don't want her to be afraid of me. She won't be. She'll understand that everything you do, every hard choice you make, comes from love. Adriana leaned down, kissed the top of his head. just like I understand now. They sat like that for a long time, the three of them in the quiet nursery, a family forged in fire and blood and love, strong enough to survive anything. The weeks that followed brought a peace that felt almost eerie after the chaos. Word spread through Chicago's underworld about what had happened to the Salvatores, about Luca's absolute ruthlessness in protecting his family. Families that had been considering moves against the De Rossis reconsidered. Allies reaffirmed their loyalty. The message had been received loud and clear. Elena grew, thrived, utterly oblivious to the fear her very existence inspired in her parents' enemies. She was a happy baby, quick to smile, fascinated by everything around her. Luca was completely devoted, spending every free moment with her, his entire fearsome reputation crumbling whenever she grabbed his finger or looked at him with those dark eyes so like his own. "You're going to spoil her," Adriana said one afternoon, finding him building an elaborate mobile above the crib. "Impossible. She's perfect. Perfect babies can't be spoiled. She's 3 months old. She doesn't need a mobile that plays Mozart and projects constellations on the ceiling. She's a De Rossi. She deserves the best." He finished securing the mobile, tested it, smiled with satisfaction when it began its slow rotation. Besides, studies show that early exposure to classical music promotes brain development. Studies also show that babies mostly just need food, sleep, and love. She has all three. The Mozart is a bonus. He pulled Adriana close, wrapped his arms around her waist. "Have I told you today that I love you?" "Not in the last hour. I was starting to get concerned." "My apologies. I love you, Adriana De Rossi. I love you more than I thought it was possible to love anyone. You've given me everything: partnership, purpose, this beautiful daughter, a life I didn't know I could have." He kissed her softly. "Thank you. You're welcome." Though technically, making Elena was a joint effort. Fair point. His hands drifted lower. Speaking of joint efforts, the doctor said 6 weeks before we could resume certain activities. It's been 7 weeks. I know. I've been counting. His smile was wicked. Tonight, after Elena goes to sleep? Presumptuous. What makes you think I'm interested? The way you're looking at me right now. He had a point. Adriana had missed this. Not just the physical intimacy, but the playfulness, the connection, the reminder that they were more than just parents or crime bosses. They were still Luca and Adriana, still the couple who'd fallen in love despite everything stacked against them. "Tonight," she agreed, "but you're on diaper duty for the midnight feeding." "Deal." That night, after Elena was asleep and the estate was quiet, they rediscovered each other with a tenderness and passion that had only deepened over the past year. Every touch was a promise, every kiss a reaffirmation of what they'd built together. When it was over, and they lay tangled in their bed, sweaty and satisfied and completely content, Adriana felt something settle in her chest. This was happiness. Real, messy, complicated happiness built on a foundation of trust and partnership and love that had been tested by fire and emerged stronger. "I have something I want to discuss with you," Luca said, breaking the comfortable silence. "That sounds ominous." "It's not, I promise." He propped himself up on one elbow, looked down at her. "I've been thinking about the business, about our operations, about what we're building here, and I want to start transitioning some of our enterprises to legitimate businesses. Not all of them. We still need the income streams, the power base. But I want Elena to inherit something more than just criminal operations. I want her to have choices we never had." Adriana studied his face, saw the sincerity there. "What kind of legitimate businesses?" "Real estate, initially. We already own half the properties in 3 neighborhoods. Why not develop them properly? Invest in the communities instead of just extracting profit. Then maybe venture capital, technology startups, clean energy." His hand found hers, threaded their fingers together. "I'm not talking about going completely legit. That's impossible for people like us. But I want to build something Elena can be proud of, something that doesn't require her to constantly watch her back." It was the most hopeful thing she'd ever heard him say. This man who'd built an empire on blood and fear was now talking about legacy, about giving their daughter a better future. "I think it's a beautiful idea," she said softly. "And I think we can make it work. We have the resources, the connections, the business sense. Why not use it for something that doesn't require quite so much violence?" "Exactly." He kissed her, deep and slow. We'll still maintain our core operations, still protect our territories. But gradually, over the next decade, we shift. We build something sustainable. Something Elena and her children and their children can inherit without the constant threat of assassination. Planning that far ahead? You're getting soft, DeRossi. I'm getting smart. There's a difference. He pulled her closer. I used to think love made you weak, that caring about people gave your enemies leverage. But you've taught me something different. Love doesn't make you weak. It makes you strategic. It gives you something worth protecting, worth planning for, worth building toward. Look at you, getting philosophical. Fatherhood changes a man. He pressed a kiss to her forehead. So does having a wife who refuses to let him stagnate in the same patterns that destroyed previous generations. They fell asleep talking about the future, business plans and investment strategies and dreams for their daughter. It was a far cry from their first night together, when Luca had performed his duty and then retreated to his own room. Now they couldn't imagine sleeping apart, couldn't fathom a life that didn't include whispered conversations in the dark, and hands finding each other even in sleep. The transformation took time. Over the next year, they began carefully diversifying their portfolio. Luca's genius for strategy translated well to legitimate business, and Adriana's ability to read people made her invaluable in negotiations. They bought failing businesses and turned them around, invested in community development projects, established a foundation that funded education and job training in the neighborhoods they'd once simply controlled through fear. It wasn't easy. The other families watched their moves with suspicion, uncertain whether the DeRossis were truly going legitimate or simply finding new ways to consolidate power. Some saw it as weakness and made moves to test their defenses. Those families learned quickly that the DeRossis' transition to legitimate business hadn't made them any less dangerous when threatened. But gradually, the balance shifted. Their criminal enterprises still existed. They'd never be able to completely leave that world, but they became a smaller percentage of their overall operations. Luca went to board meetings as often as he went to territory negotiations. Adriana spent as much time reviewing startup pitches as she did coordinating security operations. And Elena grew, oblivious to the careful tightrope her parents were walking. She took her first steps in the library where Adriana had once hidden from her husband. She said her first word, Dada, much to Luca's delight, and Adriana's mock outrage, in the study where they'd planned the downfall of their enemies. She was surrounded by love and protection, raised by parents who would destroy anyone who threatened her, but who also read her bedtime stories and sang silly songs, and made sure she knew she was cherished. On Elena's second birthday, they threw a party at the estate. It was a strange mix of guests, crime family associates rubbing elbows with venture capitalists, Marco teaching business partners how to properly hold a weapon, legitimate investors trading stories with men who'd committed unspeakable acts of violence. It was their world in microcosm, the old and the new existing side by side. Adriana watched it all from the terrace, Elena asleep against her shoulder after an exhausting day of presents and cake and entirely too much attention. Quite the party, Luca said, joining her. He wrapped his arms around both of them, his chin resting on top of Adriana's head. Quite the life, she corrected. 2 years ago, I was marrying a man who didn't want me, walking down an aisle toward a future I couldn't imagine. Now look at us. Do you regret it? Any of it? She considered the question seriously, thought about everything they'd been through, the coldness and distance of their first months, the violence and danger, the hard choices and terrible losses. She thought about Vincent dying by her order, about the Salvatores who'd threatened their daughter, about every dark moment that had brought them to this point. Not for a second, she said finally. Every terrible thing, every hard choice, every moment of pain, it all led here. To this life, to you, to Elena. I wouldn't change any of it. Even the part where I was an idiot who tried to keep you at arm's length. Especially that part. It made the moment you finally let me in that much sweeter. She turned in his arms, careful not to wake Elena. I love you, Luca DeRossi. I loved you even when you didn't want me to. I love you now. I'll love you when we're old and gray and Elena's running whatever empire we leave her. I love you too. He kissed her softly. More than I knew I could love anyone. You took a marriage that was supposed to be a business transaction and turned it into the best decision I've ever made. We made it the best decision, together. Below them, the party continued. Marco was arguing good-naturedly with someone about proper scotch. Music drifted through the open windows, and their world, messy and complicated and perfect, spun on. Years later, when people asked how the great Luca de Rossi had transformed from feared crime boss to respected business mogul, when they wondered how he'd managed to transition his empire from criminal to legitimate, he'd smile that dangerous smile and give them a simple answer. I married the right woman. But because that was the truth. Adriana hadn't just been the catalyst for change. She'd been his partner in every sense of the word. Together, they'd built something neither could have achieved alone. They'd taken a marriage that began with rejection and indifference and forged it into an unbreakable partnership. They'd transformed an empire built on fear into something their daughter could be proud of. On a crisp autumn evening, 15 years after that wedding where Luca had said he didn't want her, they stood in the same library where they'd first begun to truly connect. Elena was 17 now, brilliant and fierce, and every bit as formidable as her parents. She was at university, studying business and political science, preparing to inherit an empire that spanned both legitimate and less than legitimate enterprises. Adriana had found old photographs, was sorting through memories spread across the mahogany desk. Wedding photos, pictures of Elena as a baby, snapshots of moments that had defined their life together. "Look at this one," she said, holding up a photo from their wedding day. "You look so stern, so distant, like you're attending a board meeting, not marrying me." Luca studied the photo, and something sad crossed his face. "I was terrified, trying so hard not to care, not to want you, failing miserably and hating myself for it. If you could go back, would you do anything differently?" He pulled her into his arms, the gesture as natural now as breathing. "I'd walk up to Marco the moment I saw you in that hallway and tell him I was wrong, that I wanted you more than I'd ever wanted anything, that I was already falling for you and the wedding hadn't even started. Liar. You were too proud back then. True, but I'd like to think I would have come to my senses faster." He picked up another photo, Elena's first birthday, all three of them covered in cake and laughing. "This is who we were meant to be. A family, partners. I just had to stop being terrified long enough to let it happen." "Well, you got there eventually." She kissed him, soft and sweet and full of 15 years of love. "And now here we are. Still together, still dangerous, still completely devoted to each other, and our terrifying daughter. She gets the terrifying from you. She gets everything good from me. The dangerous parts are all you." They laughed, the sound filling the library that had witnessed so much of their journey. From strangers to enemies to reluctant spouses to partners to lovers to parents, they traveled every possible iteration of relationship and emerged stronger each time. The phone rang. Business, always business, even after all these years. But Luca ignored it, pulled Adriana closer, kissed her like they had all the time in the world. Because they did. They'd built something that would last. Not just an empire, but a love story that had started with rejection and transformed into the kind of partnership people wrote legends about. They'd proven that arranged marriages could become real ones, that business transactions could evolve into genuine devotion, that love could bloom even in the darkest soil. And when their story was told in the years to come, when people spoke of the de Rossi Empire and how it rose to prominence, they'd talk about strategy and business acumen and ruthless efficiency. But those who really knew them, who understood the foundation everything was built on, would tell a different story. They'd tell about a woman who heard her future husband say he didn't want her and chose to fight for him anyway. About a man who tried to protect himself from love and failed spectacularly. About a marriage that shouldn't have worked but became the greatest partnership Chicago had ever seen. They'd tell about Adriana and Luca de Rossi, the bride who wasn't wanted, and the boss who learned to love. And they'd know that everything they built, every business, every victory, every moment of happiness, started with those 7 words Adriana overheard in a marble hallway. "I don't want her. I never did." 7 words that could have destroyed them. 7 words that instead became the foundation of something unbreakable. Because Luca had been lying, even to himself. He'd wanted her from the first moment. He'd loved her before he knew what love was. He'd needed her before he could admit it. And Adriana? She'd taken a man who didn't think he wanted her and made him unable to imagine life without her. That was power. That was victory. That was love. And in the end, it was everything that mattered.